Chapter 1, Getting Involved with a Big Shot. The hotel suite is dimly lit. Wen Man is stumbling around, kissing a handsome stranger. Tonight, her ex-boyfriend Gu Changqing announced his engagement. She was drunk at the bar, and under the influence of alcohol and the temptation of a handsome man, Wen Man followed the man here. Since Gu Changqing could ignore 4 years of feelings and climb onto a rich girl and kick her away, she can certainly indulge herself a little. When the gun misfired, Wen Man leaned on the man's shoulder, forgetting everything around her, and whispered the name like a cat, Gu Changqing. All intimacy came to an abrupt end. With a soft sound, the lights came on. The bright lights made her see the man's face clearly. Fa Xiuting, the chief lawyer in China, is recognized as the king of hell in the legal profession. He also has countless assets under his name and is a true urban elite man. The most important thing is that he also has a very important identity, that is, Gu Changqing's brother-in-law, the scumbag who cheated on her. Wen Man suddenly sobered up. She closed her eyes gently. What a great guy. She almost slept with the brother of her former rival. Fa Xiuting let go of the woman. He leaned against the wall, lowered his head, lit a cigarette, and looked at her for a long time, with a playful expression. Miss Wen, this is really interesting. He dusted off the ashes and asked casually with a half smile, what were you thinking when you kissed me? Did you want to sleep with me and make me sick? Obviously, Hua Xiaoting recognized her too. Wen Man couldn't pretend she didn't know him. Hua Xiaoting was too famous, and it would have been hypocritical for her to say she didn't know him, even if she really had been drunk and didn't recognize him. She knew she couldn't afford to offend such a big shot, so she could only bow her head and apologize. I'm sorry, Mr. Hua, I drank too much. Hua Xiaoting didn't make things difficult for her. After finishing his cigarette, he straightened up and threw a jacket at her. Put this on, I'll take you home. Wen Man didn't act pretentiously, and she said thank you quietly. Hua Xiaoting was driving a Bentley Continental, and the two of them didn't speak on the way. Wen Man occasionally looked at him. Fa Xiuting had a perfect profile, with well-defined facial features. The shirt he was wearing was not a brand name, but it was very expensive. Wen Man guessed that a man like this would not lack women. When they arrived at the destination and stopped the car, Fa Xiuting leaned over and looked at her slender, white legs for a moment. Then he took a business card from the front storage compartment and handed it to Wen Man. Men and women can understand each other when they think about it. Wen Man could not imagine that after his identity was exposed, he still wanted to have sex with her. Although Hua Xiaoting was full of charm, it would definitely be a good experience to have an affair with him, but the thought of his identity made Wen Man's scalp numb. After hesitation, she still refused. Lawyer Hua, let's not contact each other again. Hua Xiaoting didn't care too much. Wen Man was very beautiful, but he wouldn't force people to do things against their will. He took back his business card and even nodded with restraint, saying, you are indeed suitable to be a good housewife. Wen Man was a little embarrassed, but Fa Xiuting gracefully got out of the car and opened the door for her, as if the beautiful scene that night had never happened. The Golden Continental slowly drove away. A gust of night wind blew past, and Wen Man felt a chill throughout her body. Only then did she realize that she had forgotten to return the jacket. She was hesitating whether to go after him when her phone rang. It was her aunt calling from home. She sounded very anxious and even had a hint of a sob in her voice. Wen Man, you have to come home right away. Something terrible has happened at home. Wen Man hurriedly asked what was wrong, but her aunt couldn't explain over the phone. Chapter 2, The Noble and Self-Loving Lawyer, Mr. Hua. Wen Man rushed home and saw Auntie Ruan sitting on the sofa in a daze. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. Wen Man looked around and couldn't help but ask, Auntie Ruan, what's going on? Where's Dad? Auntie Ruan was Wen's father's second wife. Hearing Wen Man's question, she couldn't help but scold. Gu Changqing is such an ungrateful wretch, he's so cruel. A few years ago, when Gu was at his lowest, you stayed by his side. Now that he has recovered, he has not only dumped you, but also sent your father to jail. Wen Man was stunned. She said, Auntie, don't worry. I'll ask Gu Changqing. She thought, even if they couldn't be husband and wife, they had a past together, and Gu Changqing wouldn't go so far as to kill them. She dialed the phone number, and it was answered quickly. Wen Man lowered her tone, Gu Changqing, we have already broken up. I beg you not to take it out on my father. Gu Changqing laughed. He said, someone has to be responsible for the deficit. Wen Man still wanted to plead for leniency. Gu Changqing changed the subject. There is still one way, it depends on whether you are willing or not. Wen Man, as long as you follow me for 5 years, I will let Uncle Wen go. Wen Man was stunned. She didn't expect Gu Changqing to be so shameless. He wanted her future and he wanted her body. Wen Man trembled with anger. Gu Changqing, you really disgust me. Gu Changqing smiled nonchalantly. You know who I am, don't you? Wen Man gritted her teeth. I won't be your concubine. Gu Changqing, don't even think about it. Gu Changqing let out a light laugh. Then prepare to hire a lawyer for Uncle Wen. Wen Man, don't blame me for not reminding you, a sentence of at least 10 years for such a large sum. Wen Man sneered, I will hire the best lawyer. Are you talking about Hua Xiaoting? Gu Changqing smiled calmly. Wen Man, you forgot that he is my future brother-in-law, will he help you in the lawsuit? Wen Man was chilled from head to toe. Gu Changqing lightly dropped a sentence. Wen Man, I'm waiting for you to beg me. Wen Man had just hung up the phone when Auntie Ruan scolded her. You son of a bitch. He's dreaming. Our family will never let you be ruined by him. Auntie Ruan started to cry as she continued, how can we hire that ungrateful bastard's brother-in-law? Wen Man, you have to do something. Wen Man lowered her eyes. After a while, she whispered, I met this lawyer once. I'll give it a try. Auntie Ruan is a woman and very sensitive. She could smell the alcohol on Wen Man's breath, and seeing the man's jacket on her, she guessed what had happened. Auntie Ruan didn't say anything. It wasn't easy for Wen Man to see Hua Xiaoting. At the reception desk of Jiaying Law Firm, the receptionist was polite but distant. I'm sorry, miss, I can't let you up without an appointment. Wen Man regretted not taking the business card last night. She asked, if I make an appointment now, when can I see lawyer Hua? The receptionist looked it up. The earliest would be half a month. Wen Man couldn't help but feel a little anxious. At that moment, the elevator door opened at the corner of the lobby, and a man and a woman walked out. The man was Hua Xiaoting. He was dressed in a classic black and white suit, looking very well dressed and like a real elite. The woman was a hot-bodied, 30-something-year-old lady. Hua Xiaoting saw Wen Man as soon as he got out of the elevator, but he acted as if he didn't know her and walked his client to the door. He shook hands with the woman and said goodbye. The woman's voice was charming. Lawyer Hua, thanks to you, I would not have been able to get a divorce and my share of the property. You don't know how stingy he was to me after he found a new love. Hua Xiaoting smiled lightly. It was the right thing to do. The woman launched an offensive. Lawyer Hua, would you like to have a drink tonight? Wen Man looked at the woman and thought that with her figure, most men would not be able to resist. Fox Shuting is not an ordinary man. He looked at his watch and tactfully declined. Unfortunately, I have a date tonight. The woman was also sensible and knew that this lawyer Fox did not fancy her. She said goodbye charmingly and got into her car and left. After Fox Shuting had sent off his client, he deliberately stopped at the front desk. He looked at Wen Man and said, have you changed your mind? Chapter 3, Lawyer Hua is hypocritical and sly. Wen Man was taken aback. She quickly picked up the paper bag in her hand and said, I've come to return Lawyer Hua's jacket. Hua Xiaoting reached out and took it. He nodded slightly and said, thank you. Then he walked straight to the elevator without saying a word. Wen Man was anxious and followed him. Lawyer Hua, I want to ask you. Hua Xiaoting pressed the elevator button and the elevator doors opened. Wen Man followed him in, brazenly. Fox Shuting glanced at her sideways. He adjusted his shirt in the mirror and said in a light tone, I won't take your case. Wen Man felt her hands and feet go cold. It seemed that Fox Shuting already knew about her family. She asked softly, did Gu Changqing say hello to you? Fox Shuting looked at her in the mirror and smiled lightly. He doesn't have that much face. Miss Wen, I just like to keep things separate. Wen Man understood what he meant. He welcomed her to have an exciting affair with him, but if it involved business, it was out of the question. She was a little embarrassed. Fox Xiaoting did not force her. Wen Man was born under his aesthetic, but it was not enough for him to make an exception. Besides, it was broad daylight, and he was not in the mood. After a few brief words, the elevator arrived on the 28th floor. Fox's secretary was waiting at the door. She was a little surprised to see Wen Man, but her years of training prevented her from losing her composure. She still said respectfully, Mr. Fox, Mr. Ma has already arrived. Fox threw his briefcase to the secretary and said, take it to the dry cleaner. The secretary left gracefully. Fox looked down at his phone and said to Wen Man nonchalantly, find another lawyer. And, don't wear your belt too loose. After he finished, he walked out of the elevator. Wen Man felt that he was hypocritical and sly. Wen Man was rejected by Hua Xiaoting, and she tried every means to see him. Her auntie was getting more and more anxious and kept complaining. Wen Man was under a lot of pressure, so she made an appointment to meet her university classmate Bai Wei. Bai Wei got married right after graduation and married a rich second-generation heir in B City. She had a lot of connections. Wen Man asked Bai Wei to help her think of a way. The two met in a coffee shop and Wen Man told her everything. Bai Wei scolded Gu Changqing, and after she was done venting her anger, she turned her eyes to Wen Man and asked, "That night, did you and Hua Xiaoting almost have a gunfight?" Wen Man blushed and stirred her coffee gently. Bai Wei lowered her voice, "Wen Man, you're amazing. Hua Xiaoting is notoriously discerning and rarely gets involved in scandals." Wen Man smiled wryly, "I have no choice, otherwise I wouldn't bother you. Hua Xiaoting is very powerful in that circle, and Bai Wei would easily offend people if she helped her." Bai Wei was very righteous. She used some connections to get Hua Xiaoting's itinerary. At 3 p.m. on Saturday, Fox Shuting had a golfing appointment at the club. Wen Man followed Bai Wei and her husband there, and unexpectedly saw Gu Changqing there as well. Wen Man was stunned for a moment. Bai Wei pinched her husband and complained, "You didn't ask me to find out if Gu Changqing was here." How could Wen Man be at ease? Bai Wei's husband apologized sincerely, "Wen Man, I'm sorry. It's my fault for not asking you to find out." Wen Man was about to speak when Fox Shuting saw them. He was dressed in a white casual outfit, with a tall and handsome figure and a strong face. Like the law firm, Fox Shuting pretended not to know Wen Man and only greeted Bai Wei's husband. Bai Wei's husband was flattered and smiled. At this time, Fox Shuting seemed to have just noticed Wen Man. Wen Man's skin was originally good, and today she deliberately dressed in a cool outfit. She wore a white loose t-shirt and light gray sports shorts. Her long, brown hair was tied up in a bun, giving her a fresh and charming look. Hua Xiaoting's eyes swept over Wen Man's long, white legs, and he said nonchalantly, "I haven't seen this person before." Chapter 4, Miss 1, Pay Attention. Hua Xiaoting pretended, and Bai Wei's husband was smart enough to cooperate. Wen Man, Bai Wei's college classmate, was a talented woman and a piano teacher. Hua Xiaoting chuckled, "So it's teacher 1. He smiled and extended his hand in a gentlemanly manner. The men around him, who came from prominent families, all had intriguing expressions on their faces, and some were envious. They could all see that this beautiful teacher 1 was here for Hua Xiaoting. Someone said, "Lawyer Hua is so lucky." Wen Man was after all a bit shy, and she had never seen such a scene before. She blushed unconsciously and pretended to reach out generously. Her soft palm was grasped. Feng Xiaoting released it immediately, with a charming smile on his lips. "Teacher 1, shall we play a round?" After saying that, he walked towards the golf course, as if he was forcing her to accept. Wen Man had no choice but to follow him. Behind her, Gu Changqing held a golf club, his face gloomy. Feng Xiaoting was in a good mood, and he wasn't annoyed when Wen Man said she wouldn't. "I'll teach you." When he said this, everyone knew what he meant, and their eyes became even more ambiguous. Wen Man was not stupid. The fact that Fox Shuting was close to her only meant one thing. He didn't like Gu Changqing. Wen Man stood in front of Fox Shuting, allowing him to hold her from behind. The sports shorts she was wearing revealed a long section of her white legs, which were pressed tightly against him. Wen Man's face was burning. "Teacher 1, pay attention." Hua Xiaoting's lips were close to her ear, whispering like lovers. Wen Man was stunned. Hua Xiaoting had already taken her hand and swung a shot. Applause broke out all around, and the flattery from those people was extremely nauseating. Lawyer Hua and Teacher 1 worked so well together. It was Lawyer Hua who led the way. Lawyer Hua took another swing, and it was about to go in the hole. The men are used to talking like this and don't think anything of it. Wen Man's face was flushed. Fox Shuting leaned against her ear and whispered, "Wen Teacher, shall we play another round?" He was good at golf and really made a hole in one. There was applause again, and Fox Shuting's handsome face was charming and full of vigor. Wen Man's body trembled. Today, she had clearly been deliberately seducing him, but he had taken her at his own will. She had a hunch that if Hua Xiaoting wanted to flirt, 95% of women would be unable to resist, but it was just that a man of his status would not easily lower his status. Wen Man was in his arms and made several more shots. During the break, Wen Man sat next to Hua Xiaoting. He didn't talk to her much, mostly talking to others about business matters, and occasionally about legal matters. Wen Man was very flattering. She handed him drinks and towels, and he accepted them naturally. Bai Wei thought there was a chance. She took Wen Man into the bathroom and whispered, "I never would have thought that lawyer Hua was so sexy. I've seen him at parties a few times, and he always looks so serious." Bai Wei was afraid that Wen Man would get burned because it was unlikely that Hua Xiaoting would marry her, not to mention that there was also Gu Changqing in between them. Wen Man saw through it all. She said softly, "It's just a physical thing. I'm not that naive." Bai Wei was relieved. The two were about to leave when Gu Changqing pushed open the door. As soon as he came in, he pushed Wen Man against the wall and his face turned dark. Bai Wei was anxious and reached out to pull him back. "Gu Changqing, what are you doing?" Gu Changqing blocked her hand and pushed Bai Wei out of the way. The door was locked from the inside. Outside, Bai Wei slammed the door and cursed in a low voice, "Gu Changqing, you bastard, what kind of man are you to bully a woman like this?" Gu Changqing didn't care about this at all. If he wasn't ruthless, how could he have dumped Wen Man and then gone so far as to kill her? Chapter 5. How many times did you have sex with him? From beginning to end, Wen Man had no power to fight back, just like their fading relationship. She looked at Gu Changqing, and all she could see in his eyes was hatred. Gu Changqing let her go, and sneered, "You want to get close to Hua Xiaoting? Do you have the ability to do that?" Everyone in the circle knows that he has high standards and doesn't easily get involved with women. Besides, Wen Man, you're so stiff that you die when you get kissed, and when a man takes off your clothes, can you stand it? Wen Man didn't want to see his face. She lowered her eyes, "This is my business, it has nothing to do with you." Gu Changqing looked down at her from a high position, his voice soft, "Or are you simply unable to forget me?" deliberately approaching Hua Xiaoting. "You think I care?" Wen Man was disgusted. She looked up at him, "Gu Changqing, if you didn't frame my father, your marriage to Li Mingzhu and Hua Mingzhu has nothing to do with me. Don't flatter yourself." Gu Changqing stared at her. Wen Man forced herself to look at him, unwilling to be weak in front of him. After a long time, Gu Changqing's mouth was full of mockery. "Wen Man, you will be willing to follow me? We will wait and see." After saying that, he opened the door and left. The luxurious wooden door slammed, and Wen Man's legs were weak. She leaned against the wall and slowly let tears roll down her eyes. Gu Changqing is really ruthless. After 4 years of relationship, she did so much for him, but in return, he betrayed her. Now Wen Man realized that Gu Changqing only wanted to toy with her, and he never wanted to marry her. And she, on the other hand, always fantasized about their wedding. Wen Man laughed at herself with tears in her eyes. "Wen Man." In her ear, she heard Bai Wei's voice. Wen Man wiped away her tears, looked up, and then she froze. Outside the door, in addition to Bai Wei and her husband, there was also Hua Xiaoting. Hua Xiaoting had changed into a suit, a dark blue shirt and iron gray pants, a very businesslike outfit. Bai Wei was very worried about Wen Man, but she didn't say a word about Gu Changqing. Instead, she explained, "It suddenly started to rain, so we can't play for the time being." Her husband also agreed, "Yes, yes. Let's make another appointment some other day, Lawyer Hua. Why don't you see Wen Man off? Bai Wei and I just happen to have something to do." Hua Xiaoting looked at Wen Man and the redness in the corner of her eyes, and his eyes were dark and unclear. After a moment, he said in a low voice, "It's a small favor." Bai Wei was relieved, but at the same time, she felt sorry for Wen Man. Wen Man had no choice but to follow Fox Xiuting. It was indeed a storm outside, with thunder and lightning. The parking lot was open, and Fox Xiuting went to get the car. After a while, a golden Continental slowly drove up to Wen Man. Wen Man had no umbrella, and she didn't have the courage to ask Fox Xiuting to get out of the car to pick her up. She was soaked halfway through the short distance. She was a little uneasy when she got into the car, afraid that Fox Xiuting would be unhappy. Fox Xiuting looked at her sideways, said nothing, and started the car. The club was halfway up the mountain, and the car had to make several turns before reaching the bottom. The air conditioner was on in the car, and Wen Man soon began to shiver and her lips turned pale. While waiting for the red light, Fox Xiuting took a jacket and threw it to her, telling her to put it on. Wen Man thanked him softly. She was instantly warmer in his jacket, but he didn't turn off the air conditioning. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. It was raining heavily and the traffic was very congested. The cars didn't move at all even after several green lights. Hua Xiaoting took out a pack of cigarettes from the glove compartment, lit one, and exhaled a smoke ring. He asked casually, "How long have you been following Gu Changqing?" Wen Man was stunned for a moment. But she still told him the truth, 4 years. Hua Xiaoting was a little surprised, and his gaze swept over her slender, white legs, and there was a hint of lust in his eyes. He shifted his body, looking nonchalant. How many times have you slept with him? Chapter 6, If you can't afford it, don't play. Hua Xiaoting asked directly, and Wen Man was a little embarrassed. In fact, she had never slept with Gu Changqing. Instead of answering directly, she mustered up the courage to negotiate with him. Lawyer Hua, you do mind my existence, don't you? If we have a relationship and you save my father, I promise to leave B City and never come back, and I won't bring any unpleasantness to Miss Hua's marriage. Hua Xiaoting suddenly smiled lightly. Miss Wen, do you really want to save your father or have sex with me? Wen Man blushed. She couldn't answer such a question without any integrity. Hua Xiaoting didn't pursue the matter. He slowly finished smoking a cigarette, and the traffic moved. He pulled over to the side of the road. Wen Man hadn't had time to ask, when she heard a slight noise. He unhooked her seatbelt. Then she was lifted onto his lap. Her jacket was peeled off, and she was wearing a thin, light-colored shirt underneath. The shirt was damp, and soon the color of his gray trousers was stained a little darker. Outside, the wind and rain were fierce. In front of the windshield, the wipers were swinging rhythmically back and forth. The view inside the car was sometimes clear and sometimes blurred. Wen Man was forced to lie on top of the man and kiss him. Fox Xiaoting was very skilled, and in a matter of seconds, Wen Man was disarmed and surrendered. She fell into the man's arms, dazed, and let him do whatever he wanted. Occasionally, she opened her eyes and saw her own lewd appearance in the car window, and she was secretly surprised. Is this the kind of woman she is? Seeing that he was about to fire his gun, a man of his status would naturally not solve it in the car. He leaned against her small mouth and asked in a hoarse voice, there is a high-end bed and breakfast next door. Wen Man sobered up a bit. Although she was kissed and turned dizzy, she still knew that so far, Hua Xiaoting only wanted to have a brief marriage with her. She hugged his neck and begged softly, Lawyer Hua, my father. Hua Xiaoting lost interest. He reached for his hand and took another cigarette, lit it, and then said, if you can't afford to play, don't play. It's not fun. Wen Man brazenly kissed him again. Hua Xiaoting didn't respond, staring at her with his deep eyes. Wen Man blushed. She had never done this before, but this little flirting was not enough to affect Hua Xiaoting. He stubbed out the cigarette halfway through and said in a cold voice, I'll take you home. Wen Man was too embarrassed to sit on his lap, so she slowly moved away. Men and women know what it is like to be in a relationship, and it is not easy for anyone to stop halfway through. Fox Xiaoting stared at her face, and his breathing became more intense. Wen Man sat back in the passenger seat, and she didn't take his jacket again. She gently turned her head and looked out the window. She understood that with her looks, Fox Xiaoting would never break his principles. She was somewhat desperate. The rest of the ride was silent, and no one spoke. Fox drove her home, and the rain had stopped. He didn't get out to help her with the door, but instead just nodded at her in a reserved manner. Wen Man didn't want to give up. Lawyer Fox, can I add you on WeChat? Fox refused, but probably because he had touched her body, he pointed her in the right direction. You should find lawyer Jiang Ming. If he represents your father in court, he can get a lighter sentence. After that, he leaned over and picked a business card out of the glove compartment, the contact information for lawyer Jiang. Wen Man held it in her hand, but she was reluctant to get out of the car. Hua Xiaoting opened the door for her and said in a low voice, Wen teacher, you will regret it in the future if you use your body to make a deal with a man. Even if Wen Man had a thick skin, she couldn't stay in the car anymore. She got out of the car, and the door closed. Hua Xiaoting immediately drove away. Wen Man stood in the dark night, her whole body shivering with cold. Chapter 7, Xiaoting, do you know her? Wen Man returned home. Auntie Ruan was burning incense and saw her return, her eyes filled with hope. Wen Man's face was pale and she shook her head. Auntie Ruan was disappointed and wanted to scold her, but in the end she relented and said, your clothes are wet. Go take a shower and don't catch a cold. Wen Man nodded. She took a shower and took her medicine, but she still caught a cold and felt dizzy. At 12 o'clock midnight, Bai Wei called and couldn't wait to know the result. Wen Man repeated it in a hoarse voice. Bai Wei was stunned. Is Hua Xiaoting the reincarnation of Lu Xiaohui? They were hugging and kissing like that, how could he resist? Could it be that Wen Man has a physical problem? Wen Man said softly, no, I feel quite normal. Ai Wei was relieved, and she encouraged Wen Man, as long as he is physically healthy, I don't believe he can't be won over. Wen Man smiled wryly. She knew in her heart that unless Wu Xiaoting wanted to, she could not seduce him. After chatting with Bai Wei for a long time, she hung up the phone and went back to sleep. When she woke up, it was already noon the next day. Auntie Ruan was not at home, and the house was quiet. Wen Man felt even more uncomfortable. When she took her temperature, it was 39.5 degrees. She got up and ate something, then took a taxi to the hospital. The hospital was crowded, and it took an hour to get a number. The doctor prescribed in 4 drip. Wen Man was hooked up to the drip at 3 p.m. She was exhausted after all the running around, and fell asleep on the simple chair half an hour later. Fox Shuting accompanied his mother to the hospital to get medicine. When they were about to leave, they happened to see Wen Man in the infusion room. Wen Man was asleep. The needle in her fair hand was asleep, and her sleeping, soft face was a little pale, looking pitiful. Fox Shuting's gaze lingered for a few seconds. Mrs. Fox noticed her son's gaze and followed it. She was surprised to see that he knew this young lady. Fox Shuting replied in a low voice, "We met briefly." Mrs. Fox told her son, "I was thinking of getting a number first, but I found that it was more complicated than before." Fox Shuting looked at Wen Man again. Wen Man had just woken up. She saw was shouting and forgot about the needle in her hand. She quickly got up, and the transparent tube of the force suddenly turned bright red. Wen Man frowned and cried out, and quickly sat down. Hua Xiaoting frowned. Mrs. Hua had a good impression of Wen Man. She said to her son, "Xiaoting, you stay and keep this young lady company. It's sad to see someone sick." Hua Xiaoting didn't want to, but when he saw his mother's eyes, he agreed. Wen Man didn't even have time to refuse. Fox sent his mother to the parking lot, and the driver was waiting. Mrs. Fox couldn't help but say again as she got into the car, "This Miss Wen looks good to me." Fox put his hands in his pockets and smiled faintly. "If my mother knew that Wen Man was Gu Chunqing's ex-girlfriend, I wonder if she would still be so enthusiastic?" He casually responded with a few words. Mrs. Fox could not force him to do so, and sighed in her heart. Fox Xiaoting returned to the infusion room, and Wen Man was sitting there in a daze. Fox Xiaoting admitted that he liked Wen Man's body, especially her long, white legs, which were quite exciting to hold in his hands. But that was all. He only wanted to get involved in her body, not in her life. Fox Xiaoting sat down next to Wen Man and asked coldly, "How many more bottles are there?" Wen Man did not expect him to really come back, and she did not dare to offend him. She answered in a soft voice, "There is one more bottle and then it's over." Fox Shuting did not say anything. He lowered his head and took out his mobile phone to deal with business. Wen Man could not find a chance to speak, and slowly fell asleep again. When she was half asleep, she seemed to hear Fox Shuting talking to the nurse, and then another jacket was placed over her legs, covering her exposed legs tightly. Chapter 8, "Didn't you come here to be with me?" She woke up again. Wen Man found herself leaning on Hua Xiaoting's shoulder, with a large hand on her waist. Wen Man smelled his breath, woody and masculine, like a good medicine to make the weather clear. Hua Xiaoting was on the phone. His voice was a little low, but stern. He was taking the call in the infusion room, which was not right, but he was so dazzling that the young women and girls around him stared at him, and those eyes could melt Lawyer Hua. Hua Xiaoting hung up the phone and found Wen Man awake. Her originally pale face had a touch of red, and her hazy eyebrows and eyes were inexperienced because she had just woken up, which was quite attractive to men. Hua Xiaoting asked very lightly, "How long do you want to lean on?" Wen Man blushed and quickly got up. Fox Shuting picked up his jacket and put away his mobile phone. He looked at her and said, "I'll take you home." Wen Man was embarrassed to trouble him again, but Hua Xiaoting was quite insistent. On the way, he received a phone call. After a few words, he told Wen Man, "I have to go back to my apartment to pick up a fax. I'll take you there after I get it." Wen Man hesitated. She knew what it meant for a woman to go to a single man's apartment, but she thought to herself with a self-deprecating smile, Hua Xiaoting doesn't need to use tricks like this. He has no shortage of women. Wen Man didn't say anything, which was considered consent. Fox's apartment was located in the prime area of City B, about 200 square meters, and the decoration was luxurious, like a model room. Fox asked one to wait in the living room, and he went to the study. The fax came from the other party, and he received the documents and then called his assistant to give him some instructions. After finishing his business, Fox was about to send one back when his cell phone rang in his pocket. The unique ringtone belonged to someone. Fox Shooting's face changed slightly, and his whole body tightened as he took out his mobile phone. Sure enough, it was that person's phone. After a long time, he turned off the phone. The person on the other end, quite arrogantly, did not dial back. Fox Shooting's mood became extremely bad. He took out a bottle of spirits from the wine cabinet. After drinking 2.5 glasses, he stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with a glass in his hand, quietly watching the night outside. Wen Man had been waiting outside for a long time. At first she could hear the fax machine inside, but then the phone stopped ringing. She was worried and gently pushed open the study door. Hua Xiaoting was standing with his back to her. Wen Man couldn't see his face, but his back was full of loneliness. Her intuition told her that Hua Xiaoting had someone in his heart, and that he was missing that person at the moment. She didn't want to disturb him, so she left quietly. "Stop." Behind her, she heard the slightly hoarse voice of Hua Xiaoting. Wen Man's body stiffened, and then she was gently embraced. Hua Xiaoting nibbled her delicate neck, and the hot breath blew in her ear. "Didn't you come here just to have sex with me?" Wen Man couldn't deny it. A voice in her heart told her that Hua Xiaoting was emotionally unstable, and he might not even recognize her after sleeping with her. But her hands and feet were weak, and she couldn't resist at all. The night was seductive. In front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of a 24-story luxury apartment in the city center, Wen Man was pinned to the glass with her delicate wrists held up high. Fox Shooting was very good at torturing people, and those subtle methods almost drove Wen Man crazy. He was clearly drunk, but he soberly looked at her face, which was sinking and emotional. Wen Man did not wait for him to take possession. Her eyes were blurred, her lips slightly parted, and her voice was also rustling. "What happened to Hua Xiaoting?" Hua Xiaoting's lustful look in his eyes was completely gone. He took a step back and said coldly, "Teacher 1, I drank a little wine and lost my temper." Wen Man's face turned pale, and she was embarrassed. Chapter 9, A Precious Gift to Make Amends. Fox Shooting finally showed some grace, reaching out to pull her skirt back into place and offer to button it for her. "I can do it myself." Wen Man's voice trembled. Her hand grasped the button, which was the size of a grain of rice, but it was too slippery to button. In the end, Fox Shooting buttoned it for her. He apologized again. To make amends, he personally called lawyer Jiang Ming and explained the situation of Wen Man's father to him. Jiang Ming appreciated this young man, and he immediately agreed to meet Wen Man. Fox hung up the phone after a few more pleasantries. He sat behind his desk, lit a cigarette, and said to Wen Man, "In addition to helping you with your lawsuit, you can tell me if you have any other requests." Wen Man knew that this would be the last time they would meet. In the past, Hua Xiaoting might have occasionally thought about her body, but now it was different. He had made up his mind to draw a clear line between them. Wen Man was a sensible person. She pretended to be relaxed. "It's just a matter of male and female love. I have nothing to lose. I have to thank lawyer Hua for his help." At the end, Wen Man's nose was a little bit sour, but she didn't want to cry in front of him. She and Hua Xiaoting weren't even friends, and it was pointless to be pretentious in front of him. She said goodbye to him and told him she would take a taxi home. Fox Shooting didn't say anything. He still sat there smoking, his eyes dark and unfathomable. Wen Man left. She didn't go home right away. She didn't want to face Auntie Yuan's disappointed eyes so soon. Night fell, and Wen Man walked alone on the street. The Ferris wheel in the city center square was lit up with colorful lights, flickering. There were young couples hugging and kissing under the Ferris wheel. Wen Man stopped. She looked quietly, and the night wind blew, her eyes moist. A golden Continental drove past Wen Man, and Hua Xiaoting saw Wen Man. She stood under the Ferris wheel and looked up at the stars, her eyes full of lingering affection. Hua Xiaoting would not narcissistically think that she was missing him. He knew exactly who she was thinking about. Hua Xiaoting stepped on the accelerator and the Bentley Continental sped away. The next day, Wen Man went to work at the music studio, which was the most high-end music training in B City. Her colleagues knew about the incident at home and could not help but comfort her a little. Wen Man did not want to affect others, so she smiled and said it was fine. At 10 o'clock, a courier from the city delivered something, saying it was from a lawyer named Hua. Wen Man opened the packaging. The exquisite velvet box contained a diamond necklace. It was dazzling and very expensive. A colleague whispered to Wen Man, "A necklace of this brand and carat weight should cost no less than $1 million." Wen Man didn't want it. But the courier didn't have any contact information for Fok Shuting, and she understood that he didn't want to see her again. After work, Wen Man went to Jie law firm. She placed the velvet box on the reception desk and asked her to pass it to lawyer Fok. The receptionist was puzzled, but she agreed. Wen Man was just about to leave when Hua Xiaoting came out with a young girl, whom Wen Man had seen in a magazine. Hua Mingzhu, the Hua family's precious pearl, was also Hua Xiaoting's only sister. Half a year ago, Hua Mingzhu returned from studying abroad and quickly fell in love with Gu Changqing. At this time, Hua Mingzhu cooed in her brother's arms, "Brother, I've asked you several times to meet Gu Changqing." Hua Xiaoting dismissed his sister nonchalantly. Fok Mingchu pretended to be angry and argued with him, but anyone with a discerning eye could see that they were very close. Wen Man watched quietly. She didn't hate Fok Mingchu, she just felt a little self-deprecating. With such a close relationship between siblings, why did she think that Fok Shuting would fight her case? Wen Man left quietly. Fok Shuting saw her. He dismissed Fok Mingchu with a few words and walked to the front desk. The receptionist immediately handed him the jewelry box. "Lawyer Hua, the lady left it just now." Hua Xiaoting took it and nodded condescendingly. Back in his office, he casually threw the box into a drawer. For a long time, he almost forgot about Wen Man, and only thought of her when his body needed relief. She had a very thin waist and long, straight legs. Chapter 10, Many people like Wen Man. In the following days, Wen Man was very busy. She met with lawyer Jiang Ming, who was very capable and was able to sort out her thoughts after a few meetings. In his spacious and bright office, Jiang Ming carefully looked over the materials Wen Man had submitted and smiled gently. "You were referred to me by Xiaoting, so I'll give you the lowdown." Wen Man's mood was somewhat mixed. Jiang Ming sat back and crossed his arms, smiling again. He said, "Xiaoting asked me to take the case, so why didn't he take it himself? If he had, there would have been a good chance of overturning the verdict and acquitting him." Wen Man didn't have the courage to say that, so she made up an excuse. "I think Mr. Hua is probably busy." Jiang Ming smiled and didn't say anything. He politely walked Wen Man to the door. Wen Man was very grateful to him, but she also knew that all of these courtesies were for the sake of Xiaoting. As she got out of the elevator, Wen Man was about to take a taxi home. Wen Man, someone was calling her. Wen Man turned around and looked over. It was someone she knew, Zhang Rui. Zhang Rui was a childhood friend of Gu Changqing and had started his own trading company at a young age. Wen Man had met him a few times at parties when she was with Gu Changqing. Zhang Rui walked up to her and casually asked, "Are you here for business?" Wen Man didn't hide it. "I'm here to see lawyer Jiang Ming." Zhang Rui smiled, "You're looking for my dad." Wen Man was stunned. Zhang Rui is the son of lawyer Jiang? Zhang Rui is tall and good-looking, the type of guy his sister loves. He said to Wen Man, "Wen Man, let me take you to dinner. We're all acquaintances, and I'll help you if I can." Wen Man hesitated for a moment, then agreed. Zhang Rui drove up in his car. A red Ferrari, quite flashy. He sat in the car and said, "No girl has ever been able to ride in my car, Wen Man, you are the first." Wen Man always felt that getting involved with Zhang Rui was a bit unreliable. He was too enthusiastic. They had only met a few times, and they had never even spoken. In any case, Wen Man did not want to offend Jiang Ming's son, so she got into the car. Zhang Rui waited until she had fastened her seatbelt and asked, "What do you want to eat?" Wen Man did not act pretentiously and suggested, "Thai food." Zhang Rui stepped on the accelerator. In the car, Wen Man did not speak much, her mind was full of details of the lawsuit. Zhang Rui did not disturb her. He would quietly watch her while waiting for the red light. He had always liked Wen Man, but no one knew. Gu Changqing knew even less. His ex-girlfriend had many admirers, and if it weren't for Gu Changqing, he would have made a move. Half an hour later, Zhang Rui drove to a Thai restaurant. Because the food was good, there were many customers. Zhang Rui asked for a seat by the window, and when ordering, Wen Man volunteered to say, "I'll pay." Zhang Rui smiled, "I really can't tell that Wen Man is such an active girl." Wen Man knew he was joking, and said while ordering, "Zhang Rui, don't joke with me, a meal is nothing." Zhang Rui calmed down. Wen Man was only treating him to dinner because of his father's reputation. He was looking for an opportunity to flirt with her again. At that moment, a handsome couple walked in. The man was handsome and the woman was beautiful. It was Gu Changqing and Hua Mingzhu. Wen Man saw them too, and immediately covered her face with the menu. She thought to herself, it's not a good idea to get involved with Jiang Rui. Jiang Rui was afraid that Gu Changqing wouldn't see him. He took the initiative to say, "Hello, brother Changqing." Gu Changqing saw him about to speak, and his gaze stopped. The girl sitting across from Jiang Rui, even if she was hiding her face, he recognized her as Wen Man. Gu Changqing frowned. How could Wen Man be with Jiang Rui? Jiang Rui kindly explained to him, Wen Man asked my father to help her with a lawsuit, and I came to her to understand the case. Men are all sensitive, and Jiang Rui let Gu Changqing guess his intentions in a few words. Jiang Rui likes Wen Man, so this is a declaration of war. Gu Changqing sneered, Jiang Rui, you are so kind? He said to Wen Man again, you believe him, and you count the money for him even after you have been sold. Her intuition made Hua Mingzhu uneasy, so she asked, Gu Changqing, do you know her? Chapter 11, New Love, Old Love. The atmosphere became awkward as soon as she asked. Wen Man was embarrassed enough. Gu Changqing was about to say something unpleasant when Jiang Rui laughed lightly. He said seriously to Hua Mingzhu, Wen Man is my friend, so of course Changqing knows her. Little sister-in-law, don't worry, Changqing is loyal to you. At the end of his sentence, he glanced at Gu Changqing with a mocking look in his eyes. Gu Changqing's face was very ugly, and he left with Hua Mingzhu. After they left, Jiang Rui greeted Wen Man, the city is so big that we can bump into each other. Wen Man, next time I will definitely choose a place where I can't see Gu Changqing, so you won't be upset. Wen Man ordered the food and said softly, there is no need to deliberately avoid him. After we broke up, do I have to hide from him for the rest of my life? Besides, I'm not the one who did something wrong. Jiang Rui's eyebrows twitched slightly. He suddenly said, I'm going to the bathroom. You can start eating while I'm gone. Wen Man didn't suspect anything. Jiang Rui left, and she used her cell phone to contact a few parents to confirm the class. 10 minutes later, Jiang Rui hadn't returned, and Wen Man was wondering why. A woman's scream came from the bathroom of the restaurant, and the high-end restaurant was in chaos. Jiang Rui and Gu Changqing had a fight for unknown reasons. Wen Man saw the scene, with blood on the walls and floor, and Gu Changqing staring at Jiang Rui with a gloomy expression. An hour later, the 2 men and 2 women were sitting in the detention center, and Jiang Rui and Gu Changqing were charged with fighting over a woman. Hua Mingzhu called, crying and whining, brother, Gu Changqing and someone got into a fight, and we're in the detention center now. Brother, come quickly. Gu Changqing is a bit hurt. Wen Man's mind went blank. What? Hua Xiaoting is coming? Hua Mingzhu hung up the phone. She only had eyes for Gu Changqing, tenderly treating his wounds, his mouth is all chapped. Jiang Rui, you hit him too hard. Jiang Rui had a new bruise on his face. He was in pain and moaned, innocently complaining, he hit him even harder, didn't he? He just made fun of him for being henpecked, and he did this to me. Hua Mingzhu was suddenly sweet, and she scolded her fiancé, Jiang Rui is one of us, and you beat him up like this, making Miss Wen laugh at you for nothing. How can you let Jiang Rui pursue her? Gu Changqing took out a cigarette, lit it, and smoked it while looking at Jiang Rui gloomily. This kid is just pretending. How did he provoke me in the smoking area of the restaurant? Brother Changqing, you broke up with Wen Man, and I'm not against you pursuing her, right? I'm not the only one who's going to do it. You can't eat from the pot and look at the bowl. Gu Changqing sneered. Ha! Underestimating Jiang Rui. Wen Man didn't know about this. She was afraid that Hua Xiaoting would come in a moment and she would touch his sore spot. She was a nobody and her words carried little weight. She dared not offend him. Wen Man wanted to find an opportunity to slip away, but Jiang Rui was still hanging on to her. Wen Man, you have to take me to the hospital in a moment. My face is so badly injured, how can I see people tomorrow? Wen Man's headache was excruciating. At that moment, a sound of footsteps was heard, and Wen Man subconsciously looked up. It was Hua Xiaoting. He was dressed in a classic British handmade suit, looking perfect like a male god in a picture. After he came in, he didn't even look at this side, and went straight to talk to Uncle Hat. I'm here to bail out Jiang Rui and Gu Changqing. The other party knew his identity and politely handed him a cigarette. Mr. Hua, I'm sorry to have to trouble you for such a trivial matter. It's mainly because these two fought over a woman that it's had such a bad influence. Fought over a woman? Hua Xiaoting looked over here lightly. His gaze fell on Wen Man. Today Wen Man was dressed quite conservatively, wearing a champagne-colored silk shirt and a fishtail skirt, all tightly covered. But this kind of dress, on the contrary, adds a few more pure desires. Fak Mingqiu pleaded for Gu Changqing. Brother, Jiang Rui teased me, and Gu Changqing only fought with him because it wasn't about jealousy. Fak Shuting withdrew his gaze, lightly swept past Gu Changqing, and asked in a dull tone, really? Of course. Gu Changqing loves me so much, how could he fight for another woman? Besides, Jiang Rui and Miss Wen are not strangers. Fak Mingqiu talked to herself. Fak Shuting ignored her and went through the formalities. Gu Changqing went out first and got into the car. Fak Mingqiu hurried after him. Jiang Rui coughed lightly and said, Brother Shuting, thank you. I'll treat you to dinner some other time. After that, he wanted to pull Wen Man away. Fak Shuting watched them and slowly exhaled a ring of smoke. His voice was faint. Jiang Rui, you go out first. I have something to say to Teacher 1. Chapter 12 Teacher 1, you have a lot of energy. Jiang Rui dared not disobey. Although Wu Xiaoting was on the same level as them, his career was doing so well that he was really outshining them. Jiang Rui gave Wen Man a wink. I'll wait for you in the car. Wen Man smiled reluctantly. Jiang Rui left, and a few of the hat-wearing uncles saw the signs and said with a smile, Lawyer Hua has private business to discuss, so let's clear the area. Wen Man. When it was completely quiet, Wu Xiaoting lowered his head and played with the cigarette between his fingers. His fingers were long and strong, and even a simple action was full of charm. After a moment, he looked up at her and said, Ms. Wen, you have a lot of energy. Wen Man was stunned. She instinctively defended herself. Today's incident has nothing to do with me. You want to say it has nothing to do with you? Wu Xiaoting smiled faintly, with a hint of mockery. Ms. Wen, why did they fight? Can't you guess? Wen Man's face turned pale. In front of the powerful Wu Xiaoting, all her explanations were weak and powerless. He said it was so it must be, because he was Wu Xiaoting, the most powerful lawyer in the country. She, Wen Man, was just an insignificant weed. She was aggrieved in her heart, and tears filled her eyes. Lawyer Hua, don't worry, I will never interfere with your sister's feelings. Wu Xiaoting suddenly stood up and walked straight towards her. Wen Man didn't move. She looked up at him with watery eyes, at a loss. Fak looked down at her condescendingly, even reaching out to lightly touch her delicate face. Wen Man felt humiliated and turned her face away in embarrassment. Fak said in a low voice, Wen, you must be unwilling to accept this. It's obvious that Gu Changqing betrayed her feelings and found Mingzhu, but now you become the mistress, so you're very aggrieved, aren't you? I'm not. Are you still thinking about him? I don't. Wu Xiaoting withdrew his hand and smiled faintly. He said, I believe in your promise, Miss Wen. Wen Man was embarrassed and angry. Why did Wu Xiaoting treat her like this? She didn't dare to react, and only dared to say a few words softly, Wu Xiaoting, you bastard. He didn't get angry, but just looked at her intently. After a long time, Wu Xiaoting finally spoke, very softly, you are not wrong, you just believe in love too much. Wen Man was stunned for a moment. When she came to her senses, Wu Xiaoting had already left. Wu Xiaoting focused on driving. From time to time, he saw his sister leaning on the shoulder of the man in the rearview mirror, her face full of happiness. Wu Xiaoting raised the corner of his mouth, somewhat mockingly. The Golden Continental slowly stopped at the entrance of the restaurant. Gu Changqing got out of the car and bowed to Wu Xiaoting in gratitude. The two men looked at each other, with a meaning that only they understood. Fak Shuting nodded slightly and drove away. Fak Mingqiu climbed into the passenger seat. Girls should look like girls, be more gentle. Fak Shuting scolded his sister. Fak Mingqiu disagreed. She pulled her brother aside and said, Miss Wen was really pretty today. I can't believe Jiang Rui likes this kind of girl. I think she has a C cup. Fak Shuting lowered the window a bit. He suddenly felt a little hot. Hu Mingzhu was still talking to herself, she is so beautiful, I really doubt she is having an affair with Gu Changqing. It's a good thing she is Jiang Rui's. Hu Xiaoting did not respond, and continued to concentrate on driving. After a long time, he asked Hu Mingzhu in a low voice, when are you getting married? Hu Mingzhu blushed, this depends on Gu Changqing's wishes. He is in the middle of his career right now, and I don't dare to bother him too much. There is a red light ahead, and Hu Xiaoting stopped the car. He leaned sideways, looking nonchalant. Does he love you? Of course. What does he love about you? Hu Mingzhu was not caught off guard. She held out her delicate white palm, as if counting her family's assets. She loves my good family background, high education, good looks, decent parents, and a capable older brother. Hua Xiaoting let out a light laugh. Chapter 13, Are You That Cheap? Wen Man was dragged to the hospital by Jiang Rui. Jiang Rui was very good at annoying people, and she had to stay in the hospital for 2 hours for a little injury. He sent Wen Man home at 9 o'clock in the evening. Wen Man was in a bad mood, but she still apologized to Jiang Rui. I'm sorry for causing you trouble today, Jiang Rui. Jiang Rui's mood was more complicated than hers. He thought that Wen Man and Gu Changqing had broken up, and he would have a chance, but he didn't know that Hua Xiaoting had come out of nowhere. Although Hua Xiaoting was serious, he had only been here for a while and had already used his eyes to look at Wen Man's whole body. Jiang Rui was not blind, of course he could see it. He didn't dare to compete with Hua Xiaoting. The Hua family is in a superior position in B City, and Hua Xiaoting is a tough guy. Although Jiang Rui is serious about Wen Man, he doesn't want to involve his whole family to fulfill his love. Jiang Rui looked sideways at Wen Man. He said in a joking tone, Wen Man, if we are both single in a few years, think about it. With Hua Xiaoting's hint, Wen Man guessed his thoughts more or less. She didn't want to hurt Jiang Rui. Wen Man shook her head and said, Jiang Rui, I should leave B City after my father gets out. I don't have any thoughts about that for the time being. Jiang Rui stared at her quietly. He suddenly laughed, laughing in a strange and cute way. I was just joking with you. Are you serious? It's a bit cold. Go up. Don't worry about your uncle's situation. I'll talk to my father again. Wen Man was grateful that he didn't make it clear. When Wen Man got off the bus and left, Jiang Rui suddenly called out to her, Wen Man. Wen Man turned to look at him. Jiang Rui was sitting in the car, waving at her. Somehow, Wen Man's eyes were a little moist. She watched the car drive away before walking into the entrance hall. Probably the light bulb was broken. The first floor was quite dark. Wen Man took out her mobile phone and tried to turn on the lights. Suddenly, she was embraced from behind, and her lips were covered by a warm palm. In a flurry, she was dragged into the stairwell of the safe passage. Let go of me. As she had hoped, the man's hand moved away, and then a warm object covered her lips. The familiar male scent made Wen Man stunned. It was Gu Changqing. Wen Man bit and slapped him. With a pop, the lights around her all lit up strangely. Wen Man used up all her strength. She leaned against the wall and panted desperately, like a dying fish. Gu Changqing's face was gloomy. You are that cheap, anyone can do it, right? Wen Man looked up, her eyes burning. She smiled, not angry, yes. I am cheap. Anyone but you can do it. Gu Changqing, is this answer satisfactory to you? Gu Changqing's face turned even more gloomy. He grabbed Wen Man's neck, and his forehead veins were throbbing. How dare you? How dare I not? Gu Changqing, I've been so miserable because of you. What else am I afraid of? Gu Changqing suddenly let her go. He took out a pack of cigarettes, but it was empty. He crushed it and threw it on the ground, then looked up at Wen Man, leave B City. I'll buy you a villa, and Uncle Wen will be fine. Wen Man trembled with anger. She quivered her lips and asked, You set all this up just to make me your concubine? Gu Changqing, you're ruthless. Gu Changqing looked indifferent. Wen Man, it's no good to oppose me. I have plenty of ways to deal with you. Auntie Ruan appeared in the hallway, holding a mop in her hand. She pummeled Gu Changqing. Gu Changqing, confident in her status, did not fight with the woman. Auntie Ruan panted and cursed. You son of a bitch. If you dare to harass Wen Man again, I'll kill you. Tears welled up in Wen Man's eyes. Auntie Ruan turned her head and said softly, Our Wen family does not sell daughters. Oh. No daughters for sale. Chapter 14 Teacher 1, Are you short of money? Gu Changqing was ruthless and ruthless. In just 2 days, all of the Wen family's assets were frozen. 2 properties, plus the stocks in Wen Man's father's name. Gu Changqing was sure that Wen Man wouldn't last long. When the court came to seal up the property, Auntie Ruan was so angry that she was hospitalized and put on in 4 drip. When she woke up, she was unwilling to go to Gu Changqing's company to make trouble. But Gu Changqing is not the same person as before. Auntie Ruan was not seen after she had caused a scene for a long time, and she almost ended up in jail. Wen Man coaxed and lied to her, and brought Auntie Ruan back to the hospital. Auntie Ruan lay on the hospital bed, worried. It doesn't matter that we have no home to go back to, but your father needs a large sum of money to pay off the lawyers. Although lawyer Jiang is an acquaintance, we still have to pay the money to him. Wen Man comforted her softly, I will find a way to deal with the money. Auntie Ruan was very concerned about her, and in the afternoon she gave Wen Man a bankbook containing more than 1 million yuan in her private savings. Wen Man knew that this was Auntie Ruan's retirement money. She held the bankbook in her hands and was slightly choked up. I'll use it first, and later. Auntie Ruan interrupted her, I still have a small apartment in the suburbs, although it's a bit old, but it's always good enough to live in. Wen Man, you must do your best to fight the lawsuit for your father. Wen Man nodded. After Auntie Ruan was discharged from the hospital, Wen Man took her to the temporary rental house. The house was in an old neighborhood, a small 2-room apartment of 60 square meters. The decoration was so shabby that it was not comparable to the high-end houses in the past. Auntie Ruan took a look around and moved in. Wen Man felt very guilty, so she asked Bai Wei to find her 2 part-time jobs. Bai Wei did not quite agree. You already work a lot, and if you take on 2 part-time jobs, are you going to kill yourself? Wen Man insisted, I'm fine. Bai Wei guessed that she had many expenses, so she had to find a job for her. She also took out the savings she had saved and lent it all to Wen Man. Wen Man remembered this favor. She went to the restaurant to work part-time after work every day. Although it was a bit tiring, she could get 500 yuan per hour. She was born beautiful and played the piano well, so the manager was very willing to use her. Fox Shuting and Wen Man met again in this restaurant. Fox Shuting was not dining alone. He was with a very attractive woman. They were like work partners, but there was a hint of something more. Wen Man was not surprised. A man as good-looking as Fox Shuting would not lack women. She knew her place. She and Fox Shuting were from 2 different worlds. Even when they met, she chose not to bother. It was only when she ran into him in the bathroom that she nodded lightly, Mr. Fox. Fox Shuting was smoking in the smoking area and frowned when he saw Wen Man. The woman had lost a lot of weight. Her chin was pointed, which was good-looking, but he always felt like it would break if he pinched it. Fox Shuting knew that Wen Man's training center was very high-end and did not allow teachers to take private work outside. He exhaled slowly. The smoke spread between them, and he only dusted off the ashes. Miss Wen, are you short of money? Wen Man was stunned. She didn't expect that Hua Xiaoting would still be willing to deign to speak to her, and after a moment's hesitation, she said lightly, yes, I am quite short of money. Hua Xiaoting immediately guessed that it was Gu Changqing's doing. He didn't complain, but just glanced at Wen Man's body. Even a fastidious person like Hua Xiaoting had to admit that it was actually very easy for Wen Man to make quick money. Not only was she good-looking, but she was also very soft-natured, and when it came to kissing and making out, she was quite like a young animal. No man would not like her. She can work hard and part-time, which was a surprise to Hua Xiaoting. However, Lawyer Hua respected women, and he nodded his chin lightly, very stylish. Wen Man knew that he was giving the go-ahead, and hurried into the bathroom. When she came out, Hua Xiaoting was already gone, and the beautiful woman who came with him had naturally left. Wen Man thought that Lawyer Hua should have a wild night. Chapter 15. For the first time, Wen Man felt sorry for her. The restaurant closed at 10 p.m. Wen Man came out, and it was drizzling outside. The drizzle made the gray road shine. Wen Man didn't bring an umbrella, so she held her handbag over her head and ran 200 meters to hide under the bus stop. Her clothes were completely soaked, and she held her phone in her shaking hand to call a taxi. It was difficult to find a taxi in the rain, and Wen Man waited for a long time without success. Opposite the bus stop, a golden Continental was parked on the side of the road, and Hua Xiaoting sat in the car, quietly watching Wen Man. He watched her run in the rain, her clothes soaked through and her whole body trembling. In the passenger seat was Hua Mingzhu. Hua Mingzhu had been playing with her phone for an hour, and she yawned boredom. Brother, didn't you say you were going to take me out for a late-night snack? You've been picking for an hour and still haven't picked a place. Hey, isn't that Zhang Rui's girlfriend? Hua Xiaoting lightly wiped the steering wheel and asked lazily, Zhang Rui's girlfriend? Hua Mingzhu patted the window, the one who is good-looking and has a C. Brother, let's give her a ride, okay? Hua Xiaoting looked reluctant. Zhang Rui's girlfriend, is that okay? She's getting a taxi. Hua Mingzhu suddenly said with regret. Hua Xiaoting looked over. Sure enough, a blue taxi turned around and passed by his car. Next to him, Hua Mingzhu took out Zhang Rui's phone and dialed. Zhang Rui, how can you be a boyfriend? I just saw Wen Man. It's so late, why didn't you pick her up? Zhang Rui laughed. Ah, it's my boyfriend who didn't do a good job. When Hua Xiaoting heard this, he raised his lip. Zhang Rui is really rude. Hua Mingzhu said a few more words to Zhang Rui and hung up the phone. She took Hua Xiaoting's arm and said coquettishly, Brother, can I ask Wen Man to play the piano at my birthday party? She's having a hard time now, so I'll pay her 20,000 yuan. Hua Xiaoting started the car and said lightly, she may not agree. Hua Mingzhu didn't believe it. After a while, she remembered, Brother, didn't you want to take me out for a late-night snack? Why are we going home? Fox Shooting took out a cigarette and lit it. He glanced at his sister and said, Aren't you on a diet? You still want to eat late-night snacks? Fox Mingchu was immediately convinced. She took out her phone and chatted with Gu Changqing, saying that this was the kind of thing that makes a person happy. The next afternoon, Fox Shooting returned to the mansion to get some information. As soon as he got downstairs, he heard Hua Mingzhu yelling, Brother, that Miss Wen turned me down. It's strange, not earning 20,000 yuan. Hua Xiaoting was in a suit, rushing to a meeting. After listening to Hua Mingzhu's complaints, he tapped his sister's head with a file and hummed, if she had agreed, she would have the same problem with her brain as you do. Hua Mingzhu was so angry that her beautiful face was wronged. Mom, look, brother is bullying me again. Mrs. Fox was sitting in the hall, sipping tea in a dignified manner. She smiled and said to her eldest son, I thought Miss Wen was very nice the last time I saw her, but I never imagined she was Zhang Rui's girlfriend. Fox didn't explain the misunderstanding. He smiled and said, Zhang Rui is also pursuing her. Mrs. Fox put down her English bone china cup and said casually, Miss Wen is gentle and I think she is more suitable for you. Fox Shooting looked away and nodded before leaving. As her brother left, Fox Mingchu leaned over to her mother and said, It seems like my brother is still waiting for that person. Mrs. Fox smiled faintly. She said to her youngest daughter, Your brother and that person are not destined to be together. I think Miss Wen is more likely. Fox Mingchu was surprised, but then perked up. She thought it was simple and already had a plan in mind. Chapter 16, Invite her for a drink in the evening. After work. Fox Shooting declined several invitations and drove to the restaurant. At 8 p.m., the best time for the restaurant, Wen Man was sitting at the piano playing. Tonight she wore a long dress with a hint of shoulder, and her long brown hair was smoothly attached to her waist. She was very beautiful and romantic. Fox Shooting looked through the glass for about 10 minutes, then got out of the car and pushed the door to go in. He ordered a meal, not knowing what to eat, and leisurely leaned back to listen to Wen Man play the piano. Fox noticed that from time to time, decent men would approach and chat with her, probably attracted by Wen Man. Wen Man politely refused them all. During a break, Wen Man received a business card. Jie Law Firm, Fox Shooting, attorney. Wen Man was taken aback. She turned around and saw Fox Shooting. He was sitting in the corner, holding a glass of aperitif in his hand. He had a good-looking face and his simple movements were very stylish. Wen Man didn't want to deal with him, but she was even more afraid of offending him. She still walked over. Mr. Hua. Hua Xiaoting nodded slightly, indicating that she should sit down. As soon as Wen Man sat down, Hua Xiaoting saw the new needle marks on her back of her hand. He guessed that it was because of the rain last night. Has Miss Wen eaten yet? Let's eat together. Hua Xiaoting was very serious, and he didn't seem to be as reckless as he had been when he had thrown his business card. Wen Man placed the business card on the table and said a little awkwardly, the restaurant has a rule that employees cannot eat with customers during working hours. Hua Xiaoting didn't bother to read the business card. He asked her directly, what about after work? Does Teacher Wen have time to come to my place for a drink? His meaning was very clear. If she went out with him, she would soon be able to get out of her current predicament and would no longer have to worry about money. It was just a game between a man and a woman. He felt that Wen Man had already been with Gu Changqing, so she should not mind dating someone else. Besides, the two of them had hugged before, and Wen Man had felt something. Wen Man did not consider it at all. She did not know why Hua Xiaoting suddenly became interested again and was so persistent with her. She knew her situation and used her words carefully to avoid offending him. Mr. Hua, thank you for helping with my father's case. I will find a way to repay you in the future. Fox Shooting was surprised. He thought he understood what she meant. She was not willing to have a relationship with him. Money could not sway Wen Man. Fox Shooting did not need Wen Man, but he was slightly tempted by the way she played the piano. Fox Shooting put away his business card. He was very gentlemanly and did not care. Wen Man thanked him softly, her posture low to the ground. Just when the atmosphere was awkward, Jiang Rui came over with a 16 or 17-year-old girl. Brother Shouting. Jiang Rui called him affectionately, without any of the tension between competing animals. Hua Xiaoting made a gesture, and Jiang Rui dared to sit down. As soon as he sat down, he began to promote his sister to Wen Man. My sister Jiang Shang, the heavenly music star, is just missing a reliable piano teacher. Wen Man, you should take her. Wen Man was embarrassed by these words. Fox Shouting didn't take Jiang Rui's petty thoughts seriously. He took out his wallet and took out 2,000 yuan, pressing it on the table. Teacher Wen is busy, so I won't bother you. Wen Man, out of courtesy, escorted him to the door of the restaurant. Fox Shouting didn't linger, sat in the car, nodded to her, and left. He was so precious, not at all like someone looking for a poker game. Chapter 17, Killing someone is as simple as that. Wen Man returned to the restaurant just as she was about to go on stage. Jiang Rui did not pursue her, and waited until Wen Man finished work before finding another place to talk things over. Jiang Shang was obedient and well-behaved, and Wen Man agreed to teach her. Jiang Rui offered a high tuition fee, and Wen Man had some extra money in her pocket after paying 2 months' tuition in advance. She knew in her heart that Jiang Rui was helping her in a different way. If it had been in the past, Wen Man would have refused, but now she couldn't even think about her pride. When she got home from work, Auntie Ruan wasn't there. Wen Man called her, and Auntie Ruan said she would be back soon. About half an hour later, Auntie Ruan came back. Wen Man wanted to serve her a late-night snack, but when she saw Auntie Ruan's swollen arm, she realized that Auntie Ruan's arm was swollen on one side. What happened to your arm? Wen Man helped Auntie Ruan sit down. Auntie Ruan said nonchalantly, I'm getting old. I can't even do simple things without my hands swelling up. Wen Man felt a chill in her heart. She immediately looked at Auntie Ruan's palm. She saw that the palm, which had been well maintained and delicate, had several blisters, each shiny and bright. Wen Man looked at them in a daze. After a long time, tears fell one by one. She wiped them away in a messy manner, but she couldn't suppress her emotions. She applied medicine to Auntie Ruan's wounds and then went back to the room to give her 10,000 yuan for household expenses. She refused to let Auntie Ruan go out to work again. In the night, Wen Man cried for a long time. When she got up early in the morning, she had obvious bruises under her eyes, which could not be concealed by using a lot of concealer. When she had breakfast, Auntie Ruan told her, if you can't take it anymore, do less. If it's really not working out, I'll sell the small apartment. Wen Man reassured her, it'll be fine after a while. I'll take care of it, Auntie Ruan. Auntie Ruan didn't say anything else. Wen Man finished eating, packed up, and went to work at the music center. As soon as she punched in, a colleague whispered to her, Miss Hua is looking for you. Wen Man, if you don't want to see us, just say you're on leave. Wen Man was taken aback, and then she saw Hua Mingzhu. Wen Man did not hate Hua Mingzhu, but she did not want to deal with her, so she had to ask a colleague to do it for her. However, Hua Mingzhu saw her. Hua Mingzhu walked over with a smile on her face. Wen Man, I want to know why you refused to play the piano for my birthday party? Do you not like me? After she finished asking, the whole place fell silent. All the colleagues at the music center knew about Wen Man and Gu Changqing. At this point, Gu Changqing's fiancé was asking Wen Man to like her, which was too cruel for Wen Man. The sympathetic and pitying looks made Wen Man extremely embarrassed. She whispered to Hua Mingzhu, I happen to have something to do that day. Hua Mingzhu refused to give up. Wen Man went to work, and she was drinking coffee outside, waiting until Wen Man got off work at noon to block her. Wen Man, let's have a coffee together. Hua Mingzhu was persistent. Wen Man was a good-natured person, but she couldn't calm down in the face of Hua Mingzhu. She walked straight to a fast food restaurant where she usually ate. Hua Mingzhu was wearing designer clothes and high heels, and she followed Wen Man closely, saying in a very annoying voice, you can't come to my birthday party, but you can help me choose a wedding dress, can't you? Jiang Ru said you have good taste, Wen Man, why don't you show me? Later, Gu Changqing will come over and we'll have dinner together. Wen Man's face turned pale. She was betrayed by Gu Changqing, her father was going to jail, and she was forced by Gu Changqing to be a concubine. But Hua Mingzhu didn't know anything, and she was still asking herself to love her like everyone else. Killing someone's heart, nothing more. Chapter 18, Two Women, How to Choose? Wen Man took a deep breath to calm herself down. She said to Huo Mingzhu, "Don't come to me again. Not everyone is willing to add to your love." Huo Mingzhu was used to being pampered, and she had never been rejected. She still kept pestering Wen Man, trying to figure out why Wen Man didn't like her. They walked into the alley one after the other. Wen Man felt that she couldn't get rid of her. She turned around to try to get rid of Huo Mingzhu, but the next second she opened her eyes wide. Huo Mingzhu was knocked down from behind. "It's her, Gu Changqing's fiancée. Don't worry about not getting paid if you catch her. There's another girl here. Let's catch her too. She might be worth something." Wen Man hadn't had time to call out when she felt a blackness in front of her eyes. She was dragged into a sack and put into a car. Wen Man woke up. She was sitting on a broken chair in an abandoned warehouse, her body tied up. Next to her, Huo Mingzhu was also tied up, crying and cursing. "Do you know who I am? My brother will make you rot in jail. Let me go." A man who looked like a monkey slapped her hard for making noise. "Shut up, or I'll tear your clothes off." Huo Mingzhu cried even louder. The monkey dared not really do anything to her because the Huo family was not to be trifled with, especially the lawyer Huo Xiaoting. The monkey threw a phone to Huo Mingzhu. "Call your man and tell him to prepare 20 million. Not a penny less. Also, tell him to come alone and tell him not to play tricks, or don't blame us for being ruthless." Huo Mingzhu was scared. She took the phone and cried as she dialed Gu Changqing's number. Hua Mansion. The atmosphere was tense. Huo Mingzhu had been kidnapped, and the beautiful Mrs. Huo was crying with worry. Huo Xiaoting and his father had been waiting for the call. Huo's father was dissatisfied. Those bastards were recruited by Gu Changqing, and he must give an explanation for this. After waiting for about 2 hours, the phone call from Huo Mingzhu finally came. She was crying on the phone, and finally explained the requirements of the monkey. Gu Changqing gently comforted her. Huo Mingzhu finally stopped crying, and her heart was sweet again. She knew that Gu Changqing loved her very much and would not let her be hurt. When they were almost finished talking, a trembling woman's voice suddenly came from the other end. "Don't touch me. Don't touch me." Gu Changqing's hand holding the phone trembled. He knew that voice all too well. It was Wen Man. How could she be with Mingzhu? Gu Changqing thought of those dirty hands probably roaming over her body, and he wanted to kill someone. But when he looked up at Huo Xiaoting's deep eyes, he suddenly sobered up. Huo Xiaoting was so smart. If he showed his hand, all the hard work he had spent so long to get close to the Huo family would be wasted. Gu Changqing is ruthless, and he knows it. He pretended not to know Wen Man, and said to the gangsters over there, "I will bring 20 million and you must not touch my fiancée." After he finished speaking, he was in a daze. After hanging up the phone, Gu Changqing said to the two old fox, "This time it was my negligence, but don't worry, I will definitely bring Pearl back safely." Mr. Hua nodded. He still appreciated Gu Changqing very much. Gu Changqing drove away. Only the Huo family was left in the villa. Mrs. Huo was slightly relieved. She wiped her tears and hesitated, saying, "I just heard Miss Wen's voice." Huo Xiaoting had already taken the car keys and said indifferently, "I'll go and take a look." Chapter 19. Gu Changqing chose power. Gu Changqing drove to the agreed location alone. He got out of the car and dragged 20 million in cash to the warehouse, demanding that they release the person. The leader of the gangsters, Monkey, had a scar on his face, which looked quite intimidating. He took out a few stacks of banknotes to check their authenticity, and his eyes lit up when he was sure they were real. Mr. Gu was really rich. If only Miss Hua had been sensible like this, she wouldn't have had to suffer like this. With a glance, his men immediately released Huo Mingzhu. Huo Mingzhu, now free, immediately threw herself into Gu Changqing's arms and cried, "Gu Changqing, why did you come so late? My leg seems to be broken and it hurts. They also said that if you don't come, you'll rape me." Gu Changqing hugged her and comforted her. But his eyes were fixed on Wen Man. Wen Man struggled desperately, but she was gagged and couldn't say a word. She knew that Gu Changqing would sacrifice Wen Man for power. From beginning to end, Gu Changqing did not say a word. He watched Wen Man struggle and slowly despair. The monkey laughed and picked up Wen Man's chin with a knife. "Mr. Gu, this girl is so pretty that she's worth 2 million. You're rich and generous, so you might as well take her. Otherwise, she'll be a bargain for our brothers." 2 million, Gu Changqing can afford it. He can't afford it. Hua Xiaoting already suspects him, and he can't risk Hua Mingzhu suspecting him of having an affair with Wen Man. If Hua Mingzhu breaks off the engagement with him after learning about it, his years of hard work will be ruined. Between power and women, Gu Changqing chooses power. Gu Changqing dares not look at Wen Man's hateful eyes, and he turns his back and says coldly, "I don't know her." Wen Man had already guessed the outcome, and her eyes were full of emptiness. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Gu Changqing, he's really ruthless. Gu Changqing pretended not to see, and he walked towards the car with Hua Mingzhu in his arms. Hua Mingzhu gently pulled him and whispered, "Isn't this going to be bad? If she gets raped, Zhang Rui will be sad." Gu Changqing pressed on her calf. Hua Mingzhu cried out in pain, "It hurts so much. Gu Changqing, take me to the hospital quickly." Gu Changqing put her in the car. When he straightened up, he took one last look at the warehouse. "Wen Man, don't blame me." Gu Changqing immediately started the car after getting in. He was afraid that if he waited a moment longer, he would regret it. Abandoned warehouse. The monkey spat out a mouthful and cursed, "Worthless junk, not worth 2 million. It's only good for the brothers." He told the thugs to hurry up, play is play, don't miss the boat. The thugs were excited. They had never seen such a meticulous woman before. Seriously, she was even prettier than Gu's fiancée. If they could get her, they would be so happy. Wen Man's eyes were filled with fear. She hated him even more. If she had hoped for mercy from Gu Changqing in the past, from now on, she would only have hatred for him. The thugs were about to make their move, when suddenly, a crisp sound came from the corner of the warehouse. The thugs were startled. Who was it? Fox Shooting leaned against the gray wall, playing with a lighter in his hand. He was distinguished and good-looking, and his expensive suit was in stark contrast to the dilapidated warehouse. He smiled lightly, "Teacher Wen, why are you always in such a mess every time I see you?" Wen Man froze. She slowly turned her head and saw Hua Xiaoting walking towards her while countless sirens sounded all around. At this moment, she had never been so grateful to him. Chapter 20 Lawyer Hua, your girlfriend? In the midst of the chaos, Wen Man was picked up. She leaned against Hua Xiaoting's embrace. His embrace was warm, with a faintly pleasant masculine scent. The abandoned warehouse gradually receded. Wen Man's tense nerves finally relaxed. She closed her eyes gently, and immediately felt dizzy. Hua Xiaoting. She grabbed his shirt tightly and called out in difficulty. Hua Xiaoting looked down and saw Wen Man's pale face. Wen Man leaned against him and said weakly, "I think I have a concussion after being hit on the back of my head." Hua Xiaoting did not delay and immediately drove her to the hospital. Wen Man lay in the back seat, feeling sick. She really wanted to vomit. Hua Xiaoting drove with one hand and made a phone call. "Uncle Lin, this is Xiaoting. A friend wants to bring him over to see you. It may be a concussion." "Yes, I'll be there in 10 minutes. After he finished talking, he looked in the rearview mirror and asked in a gentle voice, "Are you feeling unwell?" Wen Man closed her eyes and groaned in pain. The short sound was broken and it sounded very sad to the man. Fox Shooting's voice was low and hoarse, "We'll be at the hospital soon." Wen Man thought vaguely in the throes of pain, I didn't expect a man like Fox Shooting to be gentle. When they arrived at the hospital, thanks to Hua Xiaoting, they were taken directly to the emergency room for an X-ray. The old Dr. Lin took the X-ray, looked at it, and then smiled, "Fortunately, it's only a mild concussion." Hua Xiaoting thanked him. The old Dr. Lin looked at Wen Man and asked with a smile, "Girlfriend?" Hua Xiaoting said with restraint, "A client, I just happened to run into her." It turned out to be a client. Dr. Lin was still smiling. "Xiaoting, you take the client to the hospital to check in, and I'll have the nurse come over to give her an 4 drip." Hua Xiaoting didn't explain much. He carried Wen Man to the ward and paid the hospital bill. Wen Man was so grateful that she wanted to give him the money, but she was too uncomfortable to do so. She could only lie in bed and fight the dizziness as she dozed off. When she woke up, the drip needle had already been removed. Wen Man was feeling better. She gently turned her head and saw that it was already dusk outside through the window. A slender figure stood in front of the window, holding a mobile phone in his hand and talking on the phone in a low voice. It was Hua Xiaoting. Wen Man leaned back on her pillow and quietly watched him. Fox Shooting has a great figure, 186 centimeters tall, perfect for an Oriental woman to snuggle up to. Wen Man has had contact with him a few times, and she has to admit that even if Lawyer Fox is not that rich, the women who pursue him will not be lacking. After Fox Shooting finished talking on the phone, he turned and looked directly into Wen Man's eyes. She was very quiet, her small, snow-white face resting on the pillow, with a special kind of fragile beauty. Fox Shooting was aroused, but he looked indifferent. How long do I have to look at this? Wen Man's face flushed, and she said softly, I want to drink water. She originally thought that Fox Shooting would call the nurse, but she didn't expect him to pour her a cup of warm water, walk over to the bedside and sit down, and then put his arm around her. Wen Man was forced to lean against his chest, and she struggled slightly. Lawyer Fox, I can do it myself. Fox Shooting looked at her. His deep eyes showed no emotion, but they were serious. Wen Man did not dare to argue, so she simply leaned on his shoulder and took a sip of water from the cup in his hand. At this moment, the door to the ward opened. Dr. Lin saw the intimate scene in the ward as soon as he entered. He smiled kindly. How does the client feel? Chapter 21, Xiao Ting will recover faster if he takes care of her personally. Wen Man was embarrassed. But Fox Xiao Ting had a thick skin, and he insisted on finishing the glass of water before letting go of Wen Man to talk to the elders. This teacher one was affected by Mingzhu, and it was only right to take care of her. Dr. Lin had a good temper, so that's it. This identity has changed so quickly. After examining Wen Man, he confirmed that she was fine and then smiled and said, with Xiao Ting taking care of her personally, she should recover more quickly. Wen Man's face was burning. Dr. Lin left with a smile. Wen Man took out her phone and wanted to call Auntie Ruan, but Xiao Ting said, I called to tell them you were taking a few days off and that you were going on a business trip. Wen Man. Xiao Ting seemed to be unaware of her displeasure and said lightly, I'll have my assistant bring you some food. Wen Man couldn't help it. She asked Fox Shooting, are you looking at me like this because you're afraid I'll ruin your sister's happiness? Fox Shooting leaned against the bedside table and was sending a WeChat message to his assistant. What is Ms. Wen going to ruin? Her body? Or that old, unbearable relationship? I thought Gu Chongqing had already made a choice. He is very good looking, but he is ruthless with his words, and Wen Man's little bit of affection for him is gone. She turned over and deliberately turned her back to him. Fox Shooting crossed his long legs and looked at the woman in the bed, smiling faintly. It seems like he is angry. About half an hour later, Fox Shooting's secretary brought dinner over. When the secretary saw Wen Man, he remembered having seen this lady once at the law firm. He thought it was a one-way obsession, but he didn't know that his boss cared about her too, taking care of her personally and using his connections to help her. The secretary's eyes had a hint of ambiguity. Wen Man was in a bad mood and didn't think about these things. She was really hungry, so she thanked him and opened the wooden lunchbox. It was a meat porridge that was easy to digest and suitable for patients. It smelled so good. Wen Man felt a warm current in her heart. She felt the thoughtfulness of Hua Xiaoting. She was soft-natured and moved. She quickly lowered her head. Thank you, Lawyer Hua, for today. Hua Xiaoting had no intention of having dinner with her. He still crossed his long legs, and while handling business on his phone, he said nonchalantly, you don't have to be polite, Ms. Wen. I have other plans anyway. Wen Man was momentarily stunned. She was indebted to him, and he was a powerful and influential man. She lowered herself and said, I am being petty and narrow-minded. Fox Xiaoting looked up at her. Wen Man let him look at her with a knowing glance. She vaguely knew in her heart that he liked her looks and figure. Because his gaze contained more or less love between a man and a woman. Fox Xiaoting looked at her long enough, then slowly put away his phone. Are you sincere? He exuded such a strong aura that Wen Man dared not look at him again, pretending to drink her kanji. Yes. Fox Shooting seemed satisfied and left with his secretary. The ward fell silent. Wen Man lay alone on the bed, feeling a little uncomfortable as she realized that she was surrounded by emptiness. She simply closed her eyes and fell asleep. When she woke up again, it was already 9 p.m. Because it was a VIP ward, it was especially quiet at night, with only the rustling of the leaves outside accompanied by the chirping of insects and birds. Wen Man walked to the window and opened it. There was a garden downstairs, with dense shade and colorful flowers and plants, just in bloom in early summer. Wen Man suddenly felt like going downstairs for a walk. In a moment, she was stepping on the soft green grass, smelling the fresh grass, and feeling very comfortable. The moon was bright and the stars were few, and everything was quiet. Wen Man was planning her bleak future when a soft voice sounded, Gu Changqing, kiss me again. Chapter 22, she didn't care who he was with. Wen Man was taken aback. Hua Mingzhu? She was in this hospital too? Wen Man lifted her eyelids and saw a pair of lovers in the moonlight, embracing and kissing each other. Gu Changqing was holding his fiancée's waist and holding her face like a treasure. He was such a hot-tempered man, but he was coaxing Huo Mingju like a child. One last time tonight. You should go to bed. Huo Mingju hugged his neck, and her eyes were pure and seductive. Gu Changqing, we're engaged now. When are you going to have sex with me? Gu Changqing was about to say something, but he caught sight of Wen Man in the corner. Wen Man was standing in the corridor, not knowing how long she had been admiring the view. Gu Changqing suddenly pressed Huo Mingju to his chest, not wanting her to discover Wen Man. He himself, however, kept a close eye on Wen Man. Wen Man's rescue was unexpected. He had already decided to sacrifice her, but Wen Man's luck was good and she returned in one piece. Huo Mingju had no idea what Gu Changqing was thinking. She was immersed in tender feelings, her delicate fingers gently stroking her fiancé's chest, urging him in a low voice, Gu Changqing, what are you waiting for? Gu Changqing pretended to answer. He wanted to see Wen Man's reaction, but Wen Man only lightly raised the corner of her mouth, and soon turned to leave. Gu Changqing's heart tightened. Wen Man had once loved him so much that he would be upset for a long time if she was unhappy, and would do everything in his power to make him happy. But now, she is indifferent to the fact that he is going to do it with someone else. He doesn't believe that Wen Man doesn't feel anything. Do you really want it that badly? Gu Changqing asked in a soft voice. Then, he gently pulled the long hair of the girl in his arms, lowered his head and kissed her wildly. He was eager and fierce. Huo Mingju couldn't stand it and pounded his shoulder with her fist, complaining, Gu Changqing, what's wrong with you? Gu Changqing stopped. His eyes were deep, and the gloom in them was so thick it could not be dispelled. He suddenly picked up Huo Mingju and walked towards the VIP special ward. Huo Mingju shyly leaned on his shoulder and whispered, do you really want me? Gu Changqing nodded lightly. As he turned and entered the ward corridor, he glanced over his shoulder, but Wen Man had already disappeared. Gu Changqing's eyes were dull. Back in the private room, he and Huo Mingju had sex for the first time. Huo Mingju was shy and bold, and Gu Changqing couldn't say that he didn't enjoy it at all, but there was always something missing. It was already the early hours of the morning when it was over. Gu Changqing sat on the wooden chair on the balcony, with a box of cigarettes on the small round table. He had already smoked 4 or 5 cigarettes. He had clearly gotten everything he wanted, a beautiful fiancée and all the benefits that came with her, and his body was satisfied, but his heart was empty. He couldn't forget Wen Man's eyes, mocking and indifferent. A pair of soft arms embraced him from behind. Huo Mingju pressed her back against his, and asked tenderly, what are you thinking about? Gu Changqing stubbed out his cigarette, pulled his fiancée into his arms, and whispered in her ear, Mingju, no one is better than you. Huo Mingju snuggled into his arms, and pulled his palm, you have to be nicer to me, okay? Always love me and be nice to me. Gu Changqing's Adam's apple rolled lightly. He doesn't love people, he only loves power. Wen Man is no exception, he just chooses what is more beneficial to himself. After a while, Huo Mingju suddenly said, I just saw Miss One. Gu Changqing, are you still blaming yourself for not being able to save her? It's okay, brother. He saved her and took care of you himself. Don't worry. Don't worry? Gu Changqing snorted. Then his mood sank. He remembered Hua Xiaoting's unusual attitude towards Wen Man. Chapter 23 Gu Changqing, how are you going to make amends? Wen Man woke up early in the morning. By her pillow was a delicate square velvet box. Wen Man was stunned and opened it. Inside was a dazzling diamond ring, a classic Tiffany model, and the carat count looked high. Wen Man guessed who had sent it. She felt bitter. Gu Changqing had cornered her into a corner, almost forcing her to be raped, and yet he had the nerve to give her a diamond ring. She was about to ask the nurse to return it to him when the door opened. Gu Changqing came in and saw Wen Man looking at the diamond ring. He spoke in a gentle voice, are you awake? Do you like it? Wen Man closed the box and smiled faintly. Yes, I like it. Which woman doesn't like a diamond ring? But Gu Changqing, I don't want anything from you. Wen Man thought that seeing his face again would make her sick and angry, but she was surprisingly calm, as if she were treating a stranger. Maybe it's because she no longer loves him after being so desperate. Gu Changqing lowered his eyes and said very softly, Wen Man, this is my compensation to you, and I don't mean anything else. Wen Man tilted her head back and held back her tears. Compensation? What compensation do you owe me, Gu Changqing? If you really feel sorry for me, then leave my father alone. I will immediately take my parents and leave B City, and I will never appear in front of you again, and I will never get in your way. Gu Changqing, I am begging you, okay? Gu Changqing couldn't do it. He stood straight with his hands in his pockets. Let's talk again when you've thought it through. Wen Man couldn't hold back any longer, and she smashed the diamond ring in her hand at him. Gu Changqing, get out. The hard little box grazed Gu Changqing's forehead, leaving a thin line of blood on it. Gu Changqing didn't care. He bent down to pick up the little box and put it in his pocket. One day, he would put the diamond ring on Wen Man's finger himself, and she would willingly become his woman. He said, Wen Man, this was an accident. Wen Man closed her eyes and told him to leave. Gu Changqing wanted to say something else, but the door to the ward opened again. It was Hua Xiaoting. He was dressed quite smartly today, in a classic black and white suit, with a crisp white shirt, which made his face look even more handsome and charming. The atmosphere in the ward was delicate, but Hua Xiaoting didn't seem to notice. He nodded slightly to Gu Changqing, walked over to Wen Man's bedside, and took out a payment slip from his pocket. Teacher 1, your medical bill is 22,600. Add WeChat to me? Wen Man was still in shock when Hua Xiaoting took her phone. He leaned over her bed and scanned the QR code to add her to WeChat. Teacher 1, you're so poor, only 18,000 and change? Wen Man's face turned red. Hua Xiaoting said seriously, I still owe 46,000, so if you want to play golf with me some other time, I'll forget about the 46,000. Wen Man tilted her head slightly. Her chestnut-colored, waist-length curls were soft and supple, and she was soft and supple as a whole. She placed her hand on Hua Xiaoting's arm and said softly, I can accompany you now. Hua Xiaoting glanced at her and then looked at Gu Changqing. He smiled faintly and said in a double entendre, Changqing, you should leave us alone. Wen Man's voice was so loud that it completely drowned out Gu Changqing's. Gu Changqing squeezed the velvet box tightly, and her fingers turned white from exertion before she could force a smile. I won't disturb you anymore. He opened the door and left without looking back. The door closed, and Wen Man's entire body was exhausted. She leaned against the bed and whispered, Thank you, Lawyer Hua. Hua Xiaoting put her phone down. He playfully asked in return, Aren't you going to accompany me? Wen Man looked up at him, surprised. No, Mr. Hua, I was just cooperating with you. Hua Xiaoting still looked at her, his dark eyes so deep that it was impossible to tell his emotions. He was very good-looking, and staring at her like that, and any woman would feel something. Wen Man felt her body tingle, and a sense of femininity awakened in her. Chapter 24. What do you want to thank me for? For kissing you? Fok Shuting bent down. He didn't kiss her directly, but held Wen Man's face in one hand, and the slightly rough fingertips gently brushed her delicate cheeks. Then her hair was held, and she was touched and rubbed lightly. Such a blunt knife is the most exhausting. Wen Man had never experienced this before, and she couldn't help but moan softly, Fok Shuting. You're not calling me Lawyer Hu anymore? His straight nose was pressed against hers, and the two of them were so close together that their breaths mingled. Fong Xiaoting could kiss her at any time. Wen Man clutched the material of his shirt tightly, her heart beating fast. She wanted to close her eyes. But Fong Xiaoting wouldn't allow it. He gently tugged at her long hair, his voice low and hoarse, Wen Man, open your eyes and watch us kiss. It was the first time he had called her by her name, and for some reason, Wen Man felt like she was going to die. She opened her eyes, trembling her red lips, and slowly pressed herself against him. Fok Shuting suddenly hugged her tightly. The location was probably the hospital room, and they both felt something special. The kiss that started out as a light kiss was gradually becoming a prairie fire. Fok Shuting was a little out of control, and he whispered, Wen Man, are you sure? Wen Man had a brief moment of lucidity. She instinctively wanted to push him away, but then she thought about the feelings she had given over the years, which were simply a joke. She had kept her body pure, but it was meaningless. Thinking of this, Wen Man took the initiative to offer her lips. She was dazed, and she actually felt a sense of revenge. Hua Xiaoting ended the kiss. The man's self-esteem did not allow him to continue, so he let Wen Man lean against the side and fix her messy shirt. He looked at her with a face full of love and confusion, and said in a light tone, Miss Wen, you're all hurt, so calm down. Wen Man was completely sober. She was embarrassed and humiliated. Hua Xiaoting did not let her continue to be embarrassed. He took out a snow-white cigarette and played with it between his fingers. After a while, he suddenly said, You must be curious. With Gu Chongqing's character, why didn't I stop Mingzhu from getting engaged to him? Wen Man waited for Hua Xiaoting to continue. Hua Xiaoting broke the cigarette and said in a slightly agitated tone, 6 months ago, Mingzhu tried to kill herself by cutting her wrist in order to be with Gu Chongqing. Wen Man was stunned. She had never known. Looking at Hua Xiaoting again, she said with a trembling voice, Lawyer Hua, now I know. I promise you that I will not provoke Miss Hua. Just consider it my repayment to you. Hua Xiaoting. He was speechless. It was clearly an explanation, but Wen Man twisted it into something else. But with his temper, he definitely wouldn't say more. He only looked at her deeply. How could such a stupid person become a teacher? No wonder she was cheated by Man. After he finished, he left. Wen Man was stunned for a while. She took out her phone and tried to transfer a few thousand from her bank card to her change, but when she looked at her phone, she froze. Not only had Hua Xiaoting not transferred her 18,000, he had also transferred an additional 100,000 yuan to her. Wen Man looked at the 3 words Hua Xiaoting on the chat history and felt indescribable in her heart. She deliberated for a moment and then sent a WeChat message. Lawyer Hua, thank you. Hua Xiaoting had just sat in the car when he received Wen Man's WeChat message and saw that she had confiscated the transfer. He thought about it and sent her several WeChat messages in a row. What do you want to thank me for? For kissing you? If it's because of the 100,000 yuan, Ms. Wen, if you feel bad, you can play 10 rounds of golf with me. Wen Man received the WeChat message. Her face was so hot that she wouldn't be so naive as to take it literally. I really can't see that. Hua Xiaoting can be so sultry. Wen Man was just about to transfer all 22,600 to him when she received another WeChat message from him. Take it. I'm apologizing to you on behalf of Mingzhu. Wen Man looked at this WeChat message quietly for a long, long time. She suddenly felt a little envious of Hua Mingzhu. Chapter 25. He seems to regret it. Gu Chongqing did not leave immediately. He was outside when Wen Man was being kissed by Hua Xiaoting on the hospital bed. Gu Chongqing had seen how soft Wen Man was when she kissed. He was tense with anger, like a bowstring that could snap at any moment. When Wen Man finally could not stand it and let out a soft sound, Gu Chongqing could not stand it anymore and punched the wall across from him. Blood splattered everywhere. Gu Chongqing's palm was covered in blood. But he didn't seem to feel any pain. He didn't move, and his face was as pale as water. For a moment, Gu Chongqing wanted to rush into the room and take Wen Man away from Hua Xiaoting. But Gu Chongqing knew even better that if he took one step inside, his engagement with Hua Mingzhu would be immediately annulled. Everything he had worked so hard to achieve would be gone in an instant. Gu Chongqing suddenly left and drove to a semi-new but not quite new neighborhood. He had lived here for 2 years, and the security guard still remembered him. When the car drove in, the guard warmly greeted him, Mr. Gu is back. Gu Chongqing nodded expressionlessly. He went upstairs and opened a door. The 80-square-meter apartment contained all of his memories with Wen Man. At the time, the Gu family was on the verge of bankruptcy, and the Gu family squeezed into this old house. Not to mention a glamorous life, even the noble Mrs. Gu had to go to the market to bargain for some cheap rotten vegetables. At that time, life was tight. Wen Man often came to cook for him to take care of his pride, and subsidize him in both overt and covert ways. She was such a silly woman. She thought he loved her, but he was just using her from the beginning to the end. Wen Man never understood the sequence. Even now, Wen Man still thinks Wen Boyan was ruined by her. She never knew that a few years ago, Wen Boyan was the scapegoat he had chosen, and she, Wen Man, was just a tool for him to gain Wen Boyan's trust. This tool was too silly, and in the end, Gu Chongqing couldn't bear to let her go. Even if he had achieved success, where could he find such a simple and foolish woman who loved him? He wanted to keep her by his side. To cook for him, to rub his forehead when he was tired, and perhaps he would allow her to bear his children. Even if someone else replaced Wen Boyan, it would be a bit more troublesome. Gu Chongqing walked to the balcony and took out a cigarette and smoked it slowly. After smoking about 4 or 5 cigarettes, he dialed a phone call to his secretary. Is there anything going on with Wen Boyan? Or is it a case that lawyer Jiang is handling? The secretary nodded and said yes. Gu Chongqing gave a few instructions with a blank expression. The secretary was shocked. She had been with Gu Chongqing for a long time and knew about his relationship with Wen Man, so she couldn't help but intercede for Wen Man, Mr. Gu, after all. Gu Chongqing's tone was cold and indifferent. Do as I say. Be clean and decisive. The secretary was silent for a moment and said yes. At this moment, Huo Mingju's phone rang. Gu Changqing was distracted and didn't want to answer, but Huo Mingju kept calling, so he finally answered. Gu Changqing, where have you been? My hands hurt, can you come and put some medicine on them? My parents are coming tomorrow, maybe to discuss the wedding date, so can you ask your mother to come? Gu Changqing's mind was filled with the image of Wen Man being kissed like a cat by Huo Xiaoting. He was a little numb all over, and it was only after Huo Mingju pressed him that he replied, I know. After hanging up the phone, he thought, that's it. When a man has power and influence, what can he not have? Even if it takes 20 years, he will not regret his decision today. Chapter 26, A Bitch. The next afternoon, Wen Man was discharged from the hospital. She held her cell phone in her hand, hesitating whether to call Huo Xiaoting or send a WeChat message to thank him. After much deliberation, she gave up. Wen Man completed the discharge procedures and prepared to go home with her light luggage. When she walked out of the hospital, she bumped into an acquaintance at the door. It was Gu Changqing's mother and sister, Gu Jingjing. They were carrying several large bags of imported fruit and were talking as they walked. They must have come to see Huo Mingju, and they were all a little uncomfortable when they saw Wen Man. Wen Man nodded lightly and was about to leave. Gu's mother stopped her and spoke in a gentle tone, Wen Man, I have something to tell you. Gu Jingjing pulled Gu's mother's sleeve and said coquettishly, Mom, my brother broke up with her. What else do you have to say to her? Gu Mu is very shrewd. She knows exactly what her son has done. All she has to do now is to ask Wen Man not to appear in front of Changqing, so as to avoid ruining her son's happiness. Gu Mu asked her daughter to leave first. Gu Jingjing stamped her feet and left with a huff. After Gu Jingjing left, Gu's mother put on a smile and said to Wen Man, in theory, we should invite you to have a cup of coffee and sit down and talk, but today, Pearl's parents want to talk about the wedding date for the couple, and Auntie really can't find the time. Wen Man's heart was cold and thin. In the past, when the Gu family was in trouble, Wen Man took out all her savings to help them out. Gu Changqing's mother kept saying that she was the only daughter-in-law in the Gu family, and that if Gu Changqing ever wronged her, she would never let him go. How could it be so soon? She's changed. Wen Man smiled faintly. In fact, she felt that even smiling was a bit redundant. Gu's mother saw that she was cold, and she was also a bit embarrassed, but she still added a few words with concern. In fact, you are a very good person. I was sad when you broke up with Changqing, but now that he's happy, Wen Man, you should also plan for your own happiness. Don't get hung up on one tree and waste your youth. Wen Man was disgusted. She didn't want to pay any attention, but when she saw the new person around the corner, she said firmly, Don't worry, Auntie, I will never get hung up on one tree. Gu's mother smiled and said, I'm relieved that you think that way. She turned to go find Huo Mingju, but then she saw her son's gloomy face. Gu Changqing's hand was in his pocket, staring at Wen Man coldly and saying, Mom, let's go up. Gu's mother left with a forced smile, but Gu Changqing didn't leave. Wen Man felt cold all over. She had lost not only love, but also the embarrassment of having been trampled on by the sincerity she had once given. Gu Changqing sneered, It's hard? No one actually asked you to do that. Wen Man, your self-righteous love is nothing but a self-serving gesture. But you're not stupid, you know how to climb the social ladder. Wen Man sneered in response, thanks to President Gu for the reminder. Gu Changqing's narrow, beautiful eyes were tinged with a deep, dark color. He didn't get angry, but laughed instead, You're already like that with Huo Xiaoting, why didn't he help you? Wen Man, you can't handle a man like Huo Xiaoting, you'll regret it one day. Wen Man lowered her eyes and smiled faintly, What do I have to regret? Gu Changqing, what do you think I can't afford to lose? Wen Man didn't explain and left without looking back. Gu Changqing stood there for a long time, then sneered, Wen Man, don't push me. At this time, Huo Mingju's phone rang, and her voice was sweet, Gu Changqing, where are you? My parents are here, all waiting for you. Gu Changqing comforted gently, I'll be right over. Chapter 27 Huo Xiaoting, what do we call this? Wen Man left the hospital and first went to the detention center to see her father. Wen Boyan was in good condition, just a little thin and dark, but his body was still in good shape. Wen Man was relieved. She continued her busy life. During the day, she worked at the music center, and at night, in addition to the restaurant, she had several students take turns teaching, which was very tiring, but the income would be a little more. Before she knew it, a week had passed. During that week, she hadn't seen Huo Xiaoting, but she had seen him in the entertainment section of the newspaper, and learned that he had gone to H City. He had attended a celebrity cocktail party there. At the party, Hua Xiaoting was wearing a black velvet tuxedo, a snow-white organ shirt, and a black bow tie. He stood out in the crowd, looking extremely dignified. Next to him was a beautiful woman, and he had his arm around her waist, like a perfect couple. Wen Man recognized her as a top-notch movie star, a winner of the Best Actress award. The actress was leaning on him like a little bird, her face full of ambition to marry into a wealthy family. Wen Man gently put down the newspaper. She thought to herself, fortunately, she hadn't been delusional enough to think that Hua Xiaoting was special to her. It was normal for a man of his caliber to have women around him. 2 days later, Wen Man was working part-time in the restaurant. Hua Xiaoting came in. He was wearing a dark blue shirt and iron gray trousers, and was wearing a black trench coat. He was mature and handsome. He came alone, ordered a meal but didn't eat much, and just leaned back in his chair and listened to Wen Man play the piano. Wen Man didn't know why he was there, and she could only ignore the burning gaze. At 10 o'clock, the restaurant closed. Wen Man tidied up and was ready to go home. When she left, the seat where Hua Xiaoting had been sitting was empty. Wen Man felt relieved, but at the same time she felt petty. She should have said hello to him and thanked him for taking care of her at the hospital. As she walked out of the restaurant, a golden Continental pulled up in front of her. The window was lowered and it was Hua Xiaoting's handsome face. "Get in," he said briefly. Wen Man hesitated for a moment, but then got into the car on the passenger seat. It was mainly because his car was too flashy, and she didn't want to attract the attention of others. Fak Shuting started the car and looked at her after a while, reminding her to fasten her seatbelt. Wen Man blushed and quickly fastened it. She looked at Fak Shuting, who was only wearing a shirt and trousers at this time, and his jacket was casually placed in the back seat of the car. Fak Shuting said softly, "Do you think I look good?" "Ah." Wen Man's face turned even redder. Hua Xiaoting's car stopped at a red light intersection. He leaned over and looked at Wen Man, his eyes conveying a meaning that both men and women understood. Wen Man couldn't stand this ambiguity. She hesitated and said, "Mr. Hua, thank you the other day." Hua Xiaoting didn't say anything. Wen Man gritted her teeth and said, "There's a bus stop up ahead, and there's a night bus here." Hua Xiaoting's eyes were deep and he finally said, "Wen Man, stay with me for a while." He called her Wen Man. Wen Man was helplessly softened. Fak Shuting drove the car to the foot of a mountain ring, where there was no one around, suitable for doing bad things. Wen Man was slow to realize. Fak Shuting was obviously in a bad mood. He took out a cigarette, lit it, and then smoked it deeply and shallowly. The slender fingers held the cigarette and placed it outside the car window, back and forth. That picture was indescribably pleasing. It was cold at the foot of the mountain, and Wen Man was wearing a skirt. She soon had a red nose and some redness around her eyes, which made her white face look particularly charming. Fak Shuting bent down to throw his jacket to her. "Put it on." "Thank you." Wen Man's voice trembled slightly. She regretted coming here with him. She always felt that Fak Shuting was a little different tonight. Her intuition was correct. After finishing his cigarette, Fak Shuting leaned over and kissed her. After a while of intermittent kissing, Wen Man became sober. She whispered against his shoulder, "Fak Shuting." She whispered, "What are we?" Fak Shuting looked at her quietly and knew that she didn't want to. Chapter 28, Stay with me for a while, sweetie. Fak Shuting looked at her quietly. After a long time, he let go of her arm, leaned lightly against the leather backrest and closed his eyes slightly. He looked very tired. Wen Man couldn't bring herself to say a word of reproach, so she looked at him sideways. After a while, Hua Xiaoting got up and pressed a button. The roof of the car slid open, and was replaced by a dark blue glass. Because it was in the mountains, the stars in the night sky were exceptionally bright. Hua Xiaoting leaned back and didn't say anything, just staring up at the night sky intently. Wen Man wanted to ask him, but he just pulled her over. She was forced to lean on his shoulder, smelling the unique woody scent on his body. Wen Man's face was a little hot. "Stay with me for a while." Hua Xiaoting's voice was hoarse. Wen Man couldn't refuse. She didn't know if all successful men were good at playing the victim or if all women fell for it, but Hua Xiaoting had helped her, and when he showed his tired and vulnerable expression, she couldn't push him away. Maybe she had been silent for too long, because Hua Xiaoting asked her in a low voice, "What are you thinking about?" "I'm not thinking about anything." Wen Man's mind was a bit confused. Later, no one spoke, just quietly embracing each other. Fox Shooting's looks were too good. If Wen Man said she didn't feel anything, she was lying. She didn't push him away either, but quietly put her arms around his waist. Wen Man was embraced by the pure masculine breath. She had to admit that the sensual stimulation Fox Shooting brought her was something she had never experienced before, even with Gu Changqing. If it weren't for the family business, she would have been willing to have an affair with Fox Shooting. But there were too many things in between them, and they were destined never to meet. She was so dazed that she fell asleep in his arms. Fox Shooting looked down at Wen Man in his arms. Her long brown hair was scattered on her shoulders, her face was as clean as a pine tree in the snow, her shoulders were thin, and she was very light and soft in his arms. Wen Man was good-looking, not radiant beauty, but rather warm and pleasant to look at. The kind that is suitable for raising at home. Fox Shooting had been busy for many days and was a bit tired. He closed his eyes gently. Wen Man woke up to find the atmosphere a little strange. She could clearly feel him. Wen Man had never been with a man before and didn't know that this was how men always woke up. She bit her lip and was at a loss as to what to do. She didn't dare to move an inch. In the dark car, Wen Shouting's eyes were burning. Wen Man asked in a soft, muffled voice, "What time is it?" Wen Shouting's hot breath was blowing in her ear. "It's almost 1 a.m. I'll take you home in a little while." Wen Man dared not move, obediently curling up in his arms. Wen Shouting suddenly laughed out loud. His mood had inexplicably improved. He lightly brushed her cheek with his long fingers. "Is Ms. Wen repaying me, or is she enjoying herself?" Wen Man's thoughts were revealed, and she was a little embarrassed. She didn't care about him anymore, and moved directly to the passenger seat. Wen Shouting let out a soft groan and glanced at her. Wen Man's face flushed, and she said in a defensive tone, "Mr. Hua, please take me home." Wen Shouting saw a faint blush on her face. He was slightly surprised. Wen Man had been with Gu Changqing for 4 years, so she should have had a lot of experience, but why was she still blushing so easily? Wen Shouting was aroused, and he did have feelings for Wen Man. He took her home, but the address was not the upscale apartment she had been living in before, but a rundown neighborhood. Wen Man said softly, "I'm here." "Thank you, Mr. Hua." Wen Shouting lowered the window and looked at the buildings outside and then at Wen Man's thin body. He actually knew the most about how much she had endured, but today, she did not ask him for anything. For a moment, Wen Shouting was moved by pity. He even wanted to make an exception for her. But the thought only flashed through his mind for a moment. At the moment, Wen Man's position in his heart was not yet at that level. Chapter 29, Don't You Like Me the Most? Wen Man went upstairs. When she reached the second floor, she couldn't help but look down again. Fox Shooting's car was still parked there. The expensive Golden Continental was out of place in the old neighborhood, and this place was even less suitable for someone of Fox Shooting's status. Wen Man thought that Lawyer Hua should be at a celebrity party. Everything that happened tonight was like a ripple in her life, something she should forget after a good night's sleep. Wen Man didn't dare to look again and quickly went upstairs. Fox Shooting looked at the lights on the top floor and drove away. He didn't know that a black sports car was parked in the dark, and the owner had been waiting downstairs for more than 2 hours. How long did Fox Shooting and Wen Man hold each other in the car, and how long did Gu Changqing wait downstairs? Gu Changqing came out of the car in black clothes. The black car and black clothes made his face even whiter and more handsome. He leaned against the car and lit a cigarette. The thin smoke was gently exhaled and quickly torn apart by the night. He saw everything that had just happened. Gu Changqing snorted. "Ha! In just this short time, Wen Man has fallen in love with Wen Shouting? Isn't she the one who likes him the most, Gu Changqing?" Gu Changqing stared at the lights upstairs and dialed a phone call. "It's time to get started." After giving his instructions, he hung up the phone and smiled coldly. "Wen Man, you're asking for it." Wen Man turned on the lights when she got home, and Auntie Ruan came out of the bedroom in her pajamas. "Why are you so late?" Auntie Ruan sounded reproachful. Wen Man poured herself a glass of cold water and bit her lip before deciding not to say anything. "I missed the last bus and got a little late." Auntie Ruan looked at her for a long time. "I'll make you some warm late-night food." Wen Man always felt that Auntie Ruan knew something, but she couldn't explain it. After all, she and Wen Shouting had nothing, let alone a future. After about 5 minutes, Auntie Ruan brought out a bowl of noodles and placed it on the small dining table, calling Wen Man to come and eat. Wen Man was indeed hungry and said in a low voice, "Thank you, Auntie Ruan." Auntie Ruan sat across from her, propped her chin and looked at her. Wen Man was uncomfortable being looked at like this. "What's wrong, Auntie Ruan?" she asked. Auntie Ruan seemed to have been holding it in for a long time and asked, "Was it that lawyer surnamed Hua who brought you back? Do you still have contact with him?" Wen Man nodded. "We see each other from time to time, but we probably won't see each other again." Auntie Ruan was a little disappointed. On the one hand, it was for Wen Boyan, and on the other hand, it was for Wen Man. Wen Man had fed the white-eyed wolf Gu Changqing for 4 years, and in her heart, she really hoped that Wen Man would find a better man than Gu Changqing and beat him down. Unfortunately, Wen Man knew what Auntie Ruan was thinking, so she gently shook her hand and said, "You've forgotten that lawyer Huo and Gu Changqing will be relatives sooner or later. I don't even dare to think about it." Auntie Ruan sighed lightly, and she said, "That's not going to get you out of here, and you won't even get a bite to eat. You still smell like smoke." Wen Man was drinking water and choked. She was extremely embarrassed. Back in her room, Wen Man took a shower and lay on the bed. She couldn't sleep and had a lot of random thoughts. She thought about Auntie Ruan's attitude. It seemed that Auntie Ruan had accepted the fact that Dad would be in prison for 2 years. Wen Man felt a little sad. She had thought about getting revenge on Gu Changqing, but she knew that she couldn't do anything to him. Besides, she had to take care of Auntie Ruan, who had never suffered in her life. Wen Man tossed and turned, unable to sleep. At 4 a.m., her phone suddenly rang. She thought it was a spam message and wanted to delete it, but when she looked at it, she froze. It was a WeChat message from Hua Xiaoting. "Did you sleep?" He also attached a photo, which was probably taken on the balcony of his luxury apartment. The angle overlooked the night view of the busiest street in B City, and a tall glass was placed on the railing. The transparent glass body reflected the lights of the night, and the light was overflowing. Chapter 30, Hua Xiaoting's Decision. Wen Man was slightly aroused. She gently stroked her slender fingers on the phone, and after hesitation, she did not immediately send a WeChat message, but sent it half an hour later. "Sorry, Mr. Hua, I fell asleep." There, Hua Xiaoting was holding a glass of wine in his hand, and after seeing Wen Man's message, he smiled lightly. Wen teacher's restraint is a little cute. He didn't reply, but slowly sipped the red wine in his glass. In the following days, Hua Xiaoting didn't show up again, but occasionally he would send Wen Man a WeChat message, sometimes a photo or a sentence or two. Wen Man didn't reply every time, but they understood each other's intentions. Early that morning, Wen Man received a call from Hua Xiaoting on her way to work. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Lawyer Hua?" Hua Xiaoting was sitting in the car, with a file on his lap. It was the file on the Wen Boyan case. Hua Xiaoting remembered last night when he asked Jiang Ming for the file. Jiang Ming smiled meaningfully and said, "Xiaoting, why did you change your mind? Because of Teacher Wen? I think Teacher Wen is very good, and Jiang Rui likes her very much." At that time, Hua Xiaoting smiled lightly and asked Jiang Ming not to tell Wen Man. He said he still needed to think about it. At this time, Hua Xiaoting gently flipped through the file and said to Wen Man over there, "I'm going on a business trip for a week. Let's meet when I get back. I have something to tell you." Wen Man couldn't guess, but she knew in her heart that it wouldn't hurt to get along with Hua Xiaoting. She said yes softly. Hua Xiaoting suddenly softened his heart. He lowered his voice and whispered like a lover, "How can you be so obedient and soft? Do you know that you will be bullied by men like this?" Wen Man blushed and was speechless for a long time. Fox Xiaoting smiled and let her off. After hanging up the phone, he looked at the file for a long time. Making this decision was not simply a transaction. It was mixed with pity for Wen Man, and he thought it would be a good compensation for her. Wen Man put down her phone and guessed what Fox Xiaoting wanted to tell her a week later. She was daydreaming and almost missed her stop. She hurried to the music center, and when she punched in her time card, her colleagues looked at her differently. Wen Man didn't understand why, but in the end, a colleague who was on good terms with her whispered to her, "Wen Man, the director knows about your part-time job. I heard that Ding Chang was the one who told on you. You and her both came to work here at the same time, and you are a good teacher. The high-quality students all come to you to study, and she has been unhappy for a long time. This time, she finally got her chance." Wen Man froze for a moment. Her colleague whispered a lot more, saying things like she was in trouble and that everyone could understand. At this point, Li's assistant came over and politely invited Wen Man to come with her. Wen Man followed her to the director's office on the second floor. The assistant knocked on the door. "Director Li, Teacher Wen is here. Come in." A female voice came from inside. Wen Man pushed open the door and went in. Director Lee is a woman in her early 40s who was smart and capable. At this time, she was sitting behind her desk, looking down at her documents. When Wen Man came in, she gestured for Wen Man to sit down. Wen Man wanted to explain, but Director Lee interrupted her with a gesture. It is true that Ding Cheng told me, but I have always turned a blind eye. Because you have family problems. But Wen Man, since yesterday, parents have been learning about your outside job one after another. There is a lot of pressure to replace you. I get dozens of calls a day. As you know, the children who learn to play the piano in our music center come from wealthy or noble families. I can't afford to offend them, not to mention that I am the director Wang. Wen Man naturally understood when she said this. She didn't want to make things difficult for the director, who had always taken good care of her, and she couldn't bear to leave without saying goodbye. Wen Man gently took off her work badge and placed it on the table, saying softly, "Thank you for taking care of me these past few years." Chapter 31, The Daughter and the Dog, Forever and Ever. Director Lee was a bit frustrated. She let out a sigh and said, "Do you know what it means to leave the music center? Do you know how many people are jealous of you, holding so many high-quality students in your hands?" Wen Man knew. But what could she do? She could only apologize to her senior, who had helped her, with a choked voice. Director Lee was extremely irritated. She lit a slender lady's cigarette and after smoking half of it, she looked up and said, "Wen Man, have you offended someone?" Wen Man nodded her head. She knew that Ding Cheng could not stir up a storm, and there must be Gu Changqing's hand in this. She really wanted to know how many more tricks Gu Changqing could use against her. Director Lee put out the cigarette. She still felt sorry for Wen Man. In order to appease the parents, you can only leave the music center for now. I will get you back when I have the chance. Although she said that, they all knew that after such a storm, it would be difficult for Wen Man to stand up in the industry again. Wen Man walked out of Director Lee's office, her face pale. When she was packing up, the other colleagues were very sympathetic, but Ding Cheng was sarcastic. "Wen Man, you should know the rules here. Don't think you can get away with it just because you're Lee's favorite. Now you've made a name for yourself in the industry. Who will dare to ask you to teach piano?" Wen Man took a deep breath and said coldly, "You're working with Gu Changqing, right? Ding Cheng, you're working with someone like Gu Changqing. Aren't you afraid that you'll be eaten up to the last bit?" Ding Cheng leaned in and laughed mockingly. She whispered, "Wen Man, do you think I knew? I can tell you things you don't know. I dated him long before you and Gu Changqing got together." "You know what I mean?" Ding Cheng said in a tone of voice, "I dated him once." Wen Man felt sick to her stomach. She hated Gu Changqing to the core, but Ding Cheng in front of her was still smug. Wen Man said with a cold face, "Congratulations." She picked up the carton and was about to leave, but Ding Cheng grabbed her arm. She wouldn't let Wen Man go. Wen Man's reaction was not enough. Far from enough. Why should she? Why should Wen Man have everything in her favor from birth? Director Lee's appreciation. The status of Gu Changqing's girlfriend. And she, Ding Cheng, had worked so hard for so long, but she was always below Wen Man. Was it because she was not as good as Wen Man? No, it was because she came from a bad family, from a small city, and was looked down on more or less. Now, she had finally stepped on Wen Man's toes. Ding Cheng said proudly, "Do you know why Gu Changqing doesn't touch you? Because you always look like a reserved and wooden person, and men don't have an appetite for it." Wen Man lowered her eyes and sneered, "Then I wish you and Gu Changqing a long and happy life." After saying that, she pushed Ding Cheng away and left quickly. Ding Cheng was so angry that her face turned green. But then she became proud again. Wen Man now has no family background or career, like a dog in mourning. What else is there to be jealous of? Ding Cheng sat down in a good mood and sent a WeChat message. "I bought a black silk pajama set. Come over and I'll show it to you." The message was sent, and it took about 2 hours for the man to reply, and he was very cold. "I've been busy lately. Don't send me messages unless you have something to say." Ding Cheng felt a little wronged, but also a little sweet. She was convinced that she could control Gu Changqing. He was only using the rich girl Huo Mingzhu, and only she, Ding Cheng, could keep his heart. Chapter 32, He's so dirty, how dare he? Wen Man lost her job, and she didn't want to worry Auntie Ruan, so she didn't say anything for the time being. She sat alone on a bench in the park, quietly lost in thought. The sun was shining, but Wen Man felt cold. She did some calculations on the family finances, and it turned out that the Jiang Ming law firm would have to pay a large sum of money soon, and she also needed to take care of her father. Wen Man gently pulled a thin chain from her neck, with a pale pink diamond on it. Wen Man stroked it for a long time, and finally gritted her teeth and found a pawn shop. The manager looked at it for a long time and gave her a price, 60,000 for a live pawn, but if she gave a little more, how about 200,000? The pink diamond was worth at least 500,000, but Wen Man didn't care. She needed the money. Wen Man smiled bitterly, let's pawn it. She took the 200,000 yuan check and, after adding in the money she had at home, went to Jiang Ming's office to pay the money. When she came out, Bai Wei's phone happened to ring. Bai Wei had already heard from others that Wen Man had lost her job, and she said, "Where are you? Come over and I'll treat you to dinner." Wen Man was unable to go home, so she agreed. Bai Wei invited her to a hot pot restaurant. In the steaming restaurant, Bai Wei angrily scolded as she put meat rolls into the spicy pot. Ding Cheng is such a bitch. I didn't like her when I was in college. She hooked up with every successful man she could find. When you were with Gu Changqing, she tried to hook up with you several times, both openly and secretly. Wen Man was stunned for a moment and then smiled faintly. Now she has got what she wanted. She told Bai Wei what Ding Cheng had said. Bai Wei was stunned by what she heard, and when she came to her senses, she couldn't help but curse again. Damn. She's really something, and Gu Changqing is really cheap. These two scumbags and bitches are a perfect match. She was afraid that Wen Man would be upset, so she coaxed, don't take it to heart. Anyway, Gu Changqing is now Hua Mingju's man, so it doesn't matter if he's dirty or not. Wen Man suddenly remembered what Hua Xiaoting had said. Hua Mingju had once committed suicide for Gu Changqing. Hua Xiaoting might not know about all the messy things that Gu Changqing had done, but he was just turning a blind eye to it. She was distracted, and Bai Wei pushed her, don't be sad for this scumbag. Wen Man shook her head, no. Bai Wei sighed, that's right. Compared to a dog man, money is more important. She was worried that Wen Man didn't have enough money, so she took out a bank card. Wen Man refused, saying softly, I don't need it for now. Bai Wei didn't believe her. Wen Man put a piece of meat in her bowl and said softly, I sold the necklace. Bai Wei was stunned. After a long time, she said in a trembling voice, you little brat, why didn't you discuss it with me? This is the only thing Auntie left you, and you've never been without it since you were little. Wen Man patted her hand, about to comfort her, when the phone on the table rang. It was the part-time restaurant manager calling. Wen Man answered, and after listening for a few words, she slowly put down the phone and said to Bai Wei, I was fired from the restaurant. Bai Wei was furious. She said, it was Gu Changqing again, wasn't it? How can he be so persistent? Wen Man, let's go find him. I have to get justice for you. This bitch has cheated on you for 4 years and now she wants to drive you to death? Wen Man held back Bai Wei. She begged Bai Wei not to go because Wen Man knew that Gu Changqing was doing all this to force her to compromise and be his mistress. Bai Wei was so angry that she cried, how could Gu Changqing treat you like this? Not only is he engaged, but he also has an affair with that bitch Ding Cheng. How dare he let you go back to him when he is so dirty? Chapter 33 Wen Man, you beg me. Wen Man lowered her eyes and said soberly, it's his pride that's at work. Gu Changqing doesn't love her. He just can't accept the shame of being attached to the Hua family, and he wants to save a little face in other ways. She, Wen Man, a woman who once loved him deeply, is the target he precisely captured. Bai Wei was even more upset. She hugged Wen Man, we don't care about him. He has schizophrenia. Wen Man nodded lightly. She already had a plan in mind. After her father's case was over, she would take Auntie Ruan and leave B City to live somewhere else. But she was still filled with guilt and sadness, because her feelings had caused her father to go to prison and Auntie Ruan to live a life of wandering in her old age. Bai Wei comforted her for a long time, then left in a hurry. What was waiting for Wen Man was even worse. Gu Changqing went all out to kill her. The places where Wen Man worked part-time called one by one to terminate their cooperative relationship with her. Wen Man nodded blankly. The last call was from Gu Changqing, and Wen Man answered. No one spoke first, only the breathing of each other intertwined at both ends of the phone. Finally, Wen Man spoke blankly, Gu Changqing, what else do you want? What does he want? Gu Changqing smiled coldly, do you not know what I want? Wen Man did not say anything, and he could not help but speak again, Wen Man, beg me. Beg me, and I will make everything better. You will be better off than before, right? Remember how happy we were together? Wen Man sneered, were you happy when I waited for you to eat dinner at the apartment, while you were rolling in the sheets with Ding Chang? Gu Changqing's voice was tight, who told you? Wen Man gently said a few words, what do you think? After she said that, she hung up the phone. Ha! Let them fight it out. Gu Changqing slowly put down the phone over there, his dark eyes full of ferocity. Ding Chang, she's tired of living. He and she were just a one-night stand, a man and a woman in love, and she really thought she was his true love, Gu Changqing, and dared to gossip behind his back. Gu Changqing immediately pressed the intercom to call the secretary over, but what he didn't expect was that Ding Chang couldn't stand the loneliness and came over without an invitation. The secretary said with some difficulty, Mr. Gu, I told Miss Ding that you were in a meeting. Gu Changqing loosened his tie and said coldly, let her in. The secretary was a bit surprised and quickly brought Ding Chang over. Ding Chang had specially dressed up, wearing a tight skirt that outlined her slender figure. As soon as she arrived, she hugged Gu Changqing, looking very understanding. Are you in a bad mood? You said you were busy when I asked you out. Gu Changqing grabbed her slender neck and kissed her. His kissing technique was good and wild, and Ding Chang quickly softened her body and couldn't help but cooperate. For a moment, the office was filled with the sounds of men and women in love, making people blush and their hearts race. At the moment of passion, Gu Changqing lightly tugged Ding Chang's long hair and whispered like a lover, did you tell Wen Man about our affair? Ding Chang was caught up in deep affection at this moment, and she let out a light hum without guarding herself. Changqing, what's the point of mentioning her? Let's continue. It seems to be true. Gu Changqing pressed his face against hers and gently bit her cheek. Ding Chang was stunned. She finally sensed something different about Gu Changqing. He was very different from usual, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Just as Ding Chang was lost in thought, her scalp felt a sharp pain. Gu Changqing grabbed her hair and slammed her down, and in an instant her forehead hit the cold desk, bleeding profusely. Chapter 34 Gu Changqing, you love her. Ding Chang was stunned. Gu Changqing had no mercy. He grabbed her black hair again and forced her to face him. His face was extremely cold. Do you know what will happen if you talk nonsense? Ding Chang was in pain, but she was even more panicked. She finally realized where Gu Changqing's anger came from. He cared that Wen Man knew about their affair. Ding Chang didn't want to believe this fact, and couldn't help but whisper, you don't love her, right? Yes. I don't. Gu Changqing's smile turned even colder, but what are you? You're not qualified to interfere in my relationship with her. Ding Chang laughed and cried. The blood mixed with her tears, smearing her delicate makeup into a mess, which looked shocking. She smiled and said, Gu Changqing, you love her. No. You don't love her? Why do you care if she knows the truth? You don't want her to know that you're such a dirty, messy bastard that any woman can have sex with. If you don't love her, why do you go to all lengths to deal with her? If you don't love her, why haven't you touched her in 4 years? Are you really not interested or are you just reluctant? Gu Changqing, you must be very sorry, right? You haven't touched her in 4 years, and now she's single and can do whatever she wants with other people. Ding Chang said this with red eyes and in one breath. She thought she had beaten Wen Man, but now she realized that she was the fool. Gu Changqing had never liked her at all, and all he cared about was power and Wen Man. She was happy to have said what she had, but she was slapped twice by Gu Changqing. Ding Chang's lips trembled, but she still smiled lightly. Gu Changqing, it doesn't matter that I got slapped. The important thing is that Wen Man will never come back to you. You may get what you want, but you will never get her. Get out. Gu Changqing growled. Ding Chang straightened up, wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth, and left proudly. Gu Changqing was still in a rage, and he smashed the cell phone in his hand. The secretary was at the door and was about to come in, but she froze when she saw it. Mr. Gu had never been so angry before. Gu Changqing stood in the mess and said softly, I want to see Wen Man tomorrow. The secretary understood what he meant and looked stunned. Over there, Wen Man had temporarily kept Auntie Ruan in the dark about her unemployment. There had been so many things happening at home recently that she didn't want to worry Auntie Ruan. She couldn't sleep at night and kept thinking about the future. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Hua Xiaoting called, but Wen Man didn't answer, instead sending a WeChat message. Auntie is sleeping. I don't want to wake her up. It only took a minute for Hua Xiaoting to reply. I'll be back this Saturday. What kind of gift would you like, Miss Wen? Wen Man didn't know how to reply. She had already decided to leave B City, so she naturally wouldn't have much to do with Hu Xiaoting. Besides, she wasn't the type to play around. After much hesitation, she replied with a WeChat message. "Huo lawyer, thank you for this time." This simple sentence made it clear that she didn't want to have any more ambiguous relationships with him. Hu Xiaoting was such a smart person, he wouldn't have been able to understand. Sure enough, Hu Xiaoting didn't reply again. This was the result Wen Man wanted, but when she actually made it clear, she felt a vague sense of loss. She couldn't help but think that if she and Hu Xiaoting had met in a different way, the outcome would have been different. Immediately, she laughed at herself for thinking too much. How could a man with Hu Xiaoting's family background have a future with her? At most, it would be a fleeting marriage. Wen Man didn't sleep well that night, but she got up early in the morning, afraid that Auntie Ruan would suspect her. After she finished washing, the door opened, and Auntie Ruan's face turned pale and her lips trembled. "Wen Man, your father killed himself in there." Chapter 35, Forced to the End of the Road. Wen Man froze. Auntie Ruan said again with a pale face, "Your father killed himself in there. He is now being rescued, but his condition is very bad. Wen Man, Auntie begs you to think of a way for me to see him. His health has always been poor, and this blow is too great." Auntie Ruan covered her face and cried out in pain. Wen Man was in a state of confusion. She didn't want to believe that her father, who was as strong as a mountain, would commit suicide. She immediately called Jiang Ming and begged him to go through the procedures to let them see Wen Boyan. Jiang Ming also received the news and was about to discuss it with Wen Man. He asked Wen Man to go to the office to talk. Wen Man comforted Auntie Ruan, and the two went to the office without eating breakfast. Lawyer Jian looked grave. He made several phone calls in front of Wen Man and her mother, and finally he put down the phone and shook his head. "The man is fine, but he can't be bailed out, and he still needs medical treatment inside." Because of Jiang Rui's relationship, Jiang Ming tactfully said a few more words. "Wen Man, your father's case involves Gu, so you should talk to Mr. Gu and see if there is any room for negotiation." Mr. Gu. Wen Man closed her eyes in pain. She should have guessed that it was Gu Changqing's doing. He had done so many evil things, all to force her to return to him. But how could she go back? If she Wen Man were to be someone else's mistress, her father would spit blood when he found out. But she wouldn't give in. What would happen to her father and Auntie Ruan? Would the family really be destroyed? Wen Man sat there numbly. Lawyer Jiang looked a little distressed. He handed Wen Man a cup of warm water and said softly, "Why don't you talk to Xiaoting again? I heard from Jiang Rui that you two have been getting along very well lately." Wen Man's heart felt like it had been pricked by a needle. The pain was so intense. Lawyer Jiang was a man who had been there before. He continued in a gentle tone, "Xiaoting is not that unfeeling. The other day he still came to me to get." He suddenly thought of what Xiaoting had said and didn't say it. What if he changes his mind? Wouldn't that disappoint the girl again? Wen Man listened to his advice and nodded. When she left, she took her cell phone and hesitated whether to call Fox Shuting. But she had just rejected him last night. Now she was calling him to beg him. Would he still want to talk to her? Wen Man wasn't sure. But for her father's sake, she summoned up the courage to dial the number. The call didn't go through. Fox Shuting had turned off his phone. Wen Man was a little desperate. She almost didn't dare to face Auntie Ruan. "Auntie Ruan, where is Auntie Ruan?" Wen Man thought Auntie Ruan had gone to the bathroom, so she looked around, but couldn't find her. She began to feel uneasy, and dialed Auntie Ruan's cell phone. "Pick up the phone. Pick up the phone." The phone rang, but there was no answer. Wen Man suddenly remembered something, and she quickly ran to the elevator, frantically pressing the elevator button. When she stood in the closed elevator, her whole body was trembling. "Auntie Ruan, don't do anything stupid. Don't." Wen Man was too late. When she arrived at the Gu's CEO's office, it was in complete chaos. Gu Changqing was leaning against the mahogany desk with her hand on her stomach, and blood was constantly flowing between her fingers. The scene was shocking. Auntie Ruan was holding a fruit knife tightly in her hand, and she kept talking like a madwoman. It was just that you couldn't hear what she was saying. Wen Man trembled and called out, "Auntie Ruan." Auntie Ruan stared straight ahead and muttered, "I killed Gu Changqing, so he won't harm Boyan or you anymore." "Wen Man, I told you he wasn't right for you." Wen Man's face was full of tears. She walked forward and gently hugged Auntie Ruan, choking and saying, "Auntie Ruan, don't be afraid. I'm here." Gu Changqing covered his wound, and blood kept dripping down. The secretary wanted to give him a simple treatment first, but he pushed the secretary away and asked Wen Man, word by word, "Can't you see that I'm bleeding? Wen Man, you don't care if I live or die, do you?" Chapter 36, Kneeling to Beg for Mercy. "Mr. Gu, you are a magnanimous person." Wen Man's eyes were vacant. She looked at the man she once loved, and she felt very strange. She even doubted whether she had ever understood him. Otherwise, how could he be so cruel? Auntie Ruan was too scared to kill a chicken, so how could she dare to hold a knife? It was obvious that Gu Changqing was provoking her and setting her up. Wen Man spoke softly, "Gu Changqing, I beg you, please let me go, okay?" Gu Changqing was about to say something when Wen Man knelt down in front of him. Auntie Ruan suddenly came to her senses and made a strange sound in her mouth, as if to stop Wen Man. Wen Man refused to get up. She knelt straight. Tears were in the corners of her eyes, and her eyes, which were already clean, were shining. She said in a trembling voice, Mr. Gu, in the past, I was young and foolish and fell in love with you. I was ignorant and entangled with you. Now I beg you to let my father go and let Auntie Ruan go. I beg you." She was so humble that Auntie Ruan burst into tears. She was sober and cried to Wen Man, saying sorry. She wanted to pull Wen Man up. "How can you? How can you? Wen Man is Bo Yan's only treasure, how can she kneel to this animal?" Wen Man did not move, and there was stubbornness in her eyes as she looked at Gu Changqing. Gu Changqing had been with her for 4 years, how could she not know her? Wen Man was soft-natured, but she also had a temper. She once loved him deeply, but now she is kneeling to him in order to leave him. Gu Changqing ground his teeth, and asked in anger, "What if I don't let you go? Wen Man, what will you do?" Wen Man clenched her fingers, "Aren't you afraid that I will expose your true colors in front of the Hua family? Go ahead." Gu Changqing's face contorted, and he sneered, "You see if Hua Mingzhu will forgive me, you see if your whole family can get away with it, and you see if Hua Xiaoting will help you?" When it came to Hua Xiaoting, Gu Changqing's wounds hurt even more. He is extremely violent. It was only now that Wen Man realized the true identity of Gu Changqing. Gu Changqing came over with pain, and he pulled Wen Man close to him. He stroked Wen Man's face and said in a low, hoarse voice, "Come back to me. Otherwise, I can't guarantee what I will do. For example, I will let Auntie Ruan go to jail for 8 to 10 years for assault, or I will let Wen Boyan slap him in the face." Wen Man was so angry that she trembled all over. "Gu Changqing, you're not a human being." He grabbed her hand with one arm. Gu Changqing leaned in and said coldly, "You only found out today? You didn't say that when you liked me. You didn't say that when you blushed and waited for me to kiss you, Wen Man. At that time you said that Gu Changqing was the most handsome man in the world, don't you remember? Do you want me to help you remember?" Auntie Ruan struggled to fight him to death. Gu Changqing let go of Wen Man, and he told the security guard to restrain Auntie Ruan. His thin lips uttered cold words, "Call the police and say that this Ms. Ruan attacked me and intentionally hurt me." Wen Man grabbed his hand. Gu Changqing, however, shook her off. He lightly licked the blood on his lips. "Wen Man, you really make me angry." In the distance, the siren was getting closer and closer. Wen Man's small face turned pale. Gu Changqing had won. He was despicable and shameless. He was an animal. Wen Man closed her eyes and then opened them again. She spoke softly, "Please don't be angry. I apologize to you on behalf of Auntie Ruan." Gu Changqing sat down on the sofa gently. He reached out to Wen Man. Wen Man's hand was stained with Gu Changqing's blood. She gently lifted her hand and slowly handed it to Gu Changqing. Chapter 37, Tomorrow night, come to my villa, huh? Auntie Ruan was struggling, her mouth full of blood and tears. "Wen Man, you can't go with this animal. How am I going to explain this to your father?" There was a commotion outside the door, and several people in uniform came in. Auntie Ruan was stunned for a moment, then she screamed frantically, "I heard Gu Changqing, arrest me. Arrest me quickly. I'm willing to go to jail. I'll go to jail for the rest of my life. Don't move, Wen Man. Gu Changqing, I beg you not to move her." Auntie Ruan knelt on the ground with her head in her hands. She hated herself for being useless, for being impulsive, and for being easily provoked by Gu Changqing and dragging Wen Man down with her. The visitors were taken aback by the scene. They looked at Gu Changqing. Mr. Gu, this is. Gu Changqing gently took Wen Man's hand and forcefully pulled her to sit down next to him. Wen Man was trembling all over. He was a little displeased. She was so afraid of him? But Wen Man let go of his hand. He naturally had to give her a little sweetness. So Gu Changqing took a tissue and covered his stomach, saying lightly, "It was too chaotic just now. I may have accidentally hurt myself, but our company has surveillance. Although there were some malfunctions, they will be fixed in a few days." The people who came knew what was going on. It was just a love affair. They asked a few questions and left quickly. Wen Man was still trembling. She knew that Auntie Ruan was only temporarily fine, and that Gu Changqing had the surveillance video, so he could sue her at any time. The large office was eerily quiet. Gu Changqing's face was as white as paper. He turned his head and told his secretary to prepare the car, then lightly pinched Wen Man's chin. "Come to my villa tomorrow night, Wen Man's eyes were blank. Gu Changqing tugged at his lips. "You'll play the piano for me then." Wen Man didn't respond, but Gu Changqing didn't care. He only wanted her by his side. He believed that after a while, she would return to her obedient self. She should forget about that inappropriate relationship with Hua Xiaoting. Gu Changqing was quite injured, and a bunch of secretaries and assistants surrounded him and left in a hurry. Wen Man helped Auntie Ruan go home. Auntie Ruan was still in a daze, and Wen Man said softly, "Auntie Ruan, go take a bath, I'll make some food." As soon as she finished speaking, she was grabbed by the arm. Auntie Ruan's voice was stern. "Wen Man, I forbid you to see that animal." Wen Man lowered her eyes. What else could she do if she didn't go? Watch her father suffer and watch Auntie Ruan go to jail? No, she had no choice. Wen Man did not intend to tell Auntie Ruan. She was prepared to solve everything. After sending the two old people away, it would be her and Gu Changqing's business. "Gu Changqing, you forced me to this step." Wen Man lied to Auntie Ruan, saying that she would find Jiang lawyer to think of a way, or else see if Bai Wei had any way to go. With her repeated assurances, Auntie Ruan was slightly relieved. A private hospital in City B. Gu Changqing was admitted to the ward after treating his wounds. He changed into a loose hospital gown and wrapped several layers of white gauze around his waist. Even so, he was still discussing business with his assistant. Hua Mingzhu came over. Her eyes were red. "Gu Changqing, who hurt you?" Gu Changqing couldn't possibly say that he had injured himself on purpose, and he didn't want Hua Mingzhu to hear Wen Man's name. He made up a random excuse, and Hua Mingzhu believed it without a doubt. She was so worried that Gu Changqing looked at her and thought of Wen Man. In the past, Wen Man had also loved him so passionately, but today, he was injured like this, and she had never worried about him or shed a tear. Chapter 38, Hua Xiaoting is about to return. Gu Changqing's mood was a bit dull. He leaned against the bed and enjoyed his fiancée's care, feeding him and passing him water. Hua Mingzhu was beautiful, and Gu Changqing was not a man who would be wronged. He dismissed his subordinates and trapped his fiancée under him. Hua Mingzhu's cheeks were flushed, and her slender fingers pointed at his chest and said softly, "Get up. You have an injury." Gu Changqing's eyes were deep and had a pure masculine aggression. She couldn't help but tremble. Soon the private room became hot and Gu Changqing was very enthusiastic, and only let her go after 2 hours. After the event, Hua Mingzhu shyly nestled in his arms and pouted, "What's wrong with you today?" Gu Changqing was a little lazy. "Nothing. I just missed you." Hua Mingzhu kissed him. She leaned in and breathed in his scent. "My brother is coming back in a few days, I'll ask you to come home for dinner. There are several projects in the company under your brother's name that are suitable for you." Gu Changqing's eyes darkened. Hua Mingzhu didn't want to leave him, but she knew that Gu Changqing didn't like her to be too clingy, so she left after only half a day. Sitting in the black limousine, she couldn't help but call Hua Xiaoting. Hua Xiaoting had an important meeting today, and he had been on the phone all day, just getting started. He answered, "Pearl, what's up?" Hua Mingzhu's eyes were still moist from the affair, and she said softly with her long fingers circling, "Brother, you have to help me." Hua Xiaoting loosened his tie. "What's wrong? Who bullied you?" Hua Mingzhu said coquettishly, "It's Gu Changqing who got hurt. I asked him who hurt him, but he wouldn't say." Hearing Gu Changqing's name, Hua Xiaoting didn't say anything. At this time, Hua Mingzhu said to herself, "There's so much going on today. Brother, I ran into Jiang Rue today. He said Wen Man's father killed himself in there. It sounds so sad." Hua Xiaoting's hand loosened the tie and stopped. He asked again, "What did you say, Mingju?" Mingju didn't doubt it for a moment and said it again, "It's Jiang Rui's girlfriend. Isn't her father in there for an economic case? It's sad that he killed himself." Fok Shuting was silent for a while, and then he told Fok Mingchu that he had something to do and hung up. Fok Mingchu was a bit anxious. "Brother, I haven't finished yet. Let's talk about it next time." Fok Shuting tried to call Wen Man, but he couldn't get through. Fok Shuting simply dialed the number of Lawyer Jiang. Lawyer Jiang told him the situation and then smiled. "Shuting, this is a good opportunity for you to save the beauty." Fok Shuting smiled wryly. "You're still making fun of me at this time." After hanging up the phone, he immediately asked his secretary to book a flight for that night. The secretary was surprised. "Lawyer Fok, you have a court hearing tomorrow morning." Court hearing? Fok Shuting suddenly woke up. He had actually forgotten. He had been busy with this case for a month, and the results would be tomorrow. No matter what, he couldn't get away. Fok Shuting thought about it and wrote a note to Zhang's secretary. "You fly to B City tomorrow morning to find Miss Wen. Here is her address and phone number. Have her call me." Secretary Zhang had met Wen Man before. She smiled and said, "Miss Wen is very pretty." Fong Xiaoting glanced at her. Secretary Zhang didn't dare say anything else. After Secretary Zhang left, Fong Xiaoting continued to work on the materials for the trial the next morning. However, he called Wen Man every hour or two, but he couldn't get through until late at night. In the early morning, Fong Xiaoting booked a flight for the afternoon of the next day. Chapter 39, Fok Shuting is about to return too. Contrary to expectations, the flight on which Secretary Zhang was traveling was delayed due to a malfunction. She called Fok Shuting from the waiting room, but Fok Shuting had turned off his phone during the trial. It was not until the trial ended at noon and Fok Shuting turned on his phone that he received a message from Secretary Zhang, and he frowned and thought. The assistant of his client, Mr. Lin, came over and said respectfully, "Mr. Fok, our boss Mr. Lin would like to invite you to dinner." Fong Xiaoting put away his phone and smiled faintly. "Thank you for Mr. Lin. I won't be able to eat, I have important things to rush back to B City to deal with." Just as he was talking, the boss Lin came over. The entrepreneur in his early 40s, with a refined appearance, shook hands with Fong Xiaoting and said affectionately, "Xiaoting, you are very impressive in court. Since you have important things to do, I won't stay. Next time you come to H City, I must let me be your host." Of course. Hua Xiaoting is very charming. Mr. Lin values him very much and has his driver take Hua Xiaoting to the airport. Secretary Zhang was delayed for half a day, so she simply went back on the same flight as Hua Xiaoting. Before the plane took off, Hua Xiaoting dialed Wen Man's mobile phone again. It was still turned off. He frowned and guessed that something must have happened. City B. Wen Man stayed at home all day. Auntie Ruan was emotionally unstable, so she stayed with her for a long time. In the evening, she made dinner for Auntie Ruan and said softly, "I'm going to meet a friend soon." Auntie Ruan was suspicious. Wen Man held her hand and said, "Really? Auntie Ruan, I want to try." Perhaps Wen Man was too good at pretending, and Auntie Ruan believed her. After dinner, Wen Man went to her room and took out a large box, from which she took out an album. She gently opened it and found a photo of her mother when she was young. Wen Man gently stroked it. Her mother had passed away when she was 10 years old, and a year later, her father had married Auntie Ruan. Wen Man remembered that at that time, her father and Auntie Ruan often quarreled. One time, Auntie Ruan cried very hard, asking him why he was so good to other people's children, and even refused to have his own children. That time, little Wen Man knew that she was not his biological child. She was very scared, afraid that she would suddenly be abandoned. When her father and Auntie Ruan were not quarreling, she would pout and say that she wanted a brother or sister. But Auntie Ruan never got pregnant. She loved Wen Boyan and raised Wen Man, and later she was quite good to Wen Man. How could Wen Man bear to let such a woman go to jail for 8 or 10 years? A tear fell on the photo, and Wen Man quickly wiped it away. At the door, Auntie Ruan saw it. Her eyes darkened, and she said in a gentle voice, "Aren't you meeting someone? Clean up a little before you go out." Wen Man closed the photo album and put it away. She got up, changed her clothes, and when she was ready to go out, she couldn't help but hug Auntie Ruan. Auntie Ruan was uneasy. But when Wen Man looked up, her smile was faint, and she said that Bai Wei's person was very capable, and Gu Changqing should give her face, so Auntie Ruan let her go. Wen Man gently closed the door, and she leaned against it for a long time. She had betrayed herself like this. It was already dusk outside, and the red clouds burned the sky red, gorgeous and desolate. Wen Man looked at it quietly for a long time, then turned and got on the bus. When she arrived at Gu Changqing's villa, it was already 8 p.m. Gu Changqing was wearing a three-piece suit and sitting on the sofa drinking. The crystal chandelier above reflected a luxurious light, making his handsome face even more handsome. If it were in the past, Wen Man would have been moved, but now she felt only disgust. Gu Changqing's voice was hoarse. Where have you been? I've been calling you all day. Chapter 40. Gu Changqing, we don't have to be like this. Wen Man didn't say anything. Gu Changqing looked at her quietly for a while, then put down his wine glass and got up. Let's eat. Wen Man's expression was cold. Gu Changqing, you don't need to be like this. When she said this, Gu Changqing smiled lightly. He walked up to her, pinched her pointed chin, and whispered, that's right. We don't have to be like this. After all, you now think of me as a scourge. Wen Man, do you hate me so much? Wen Man stood straight, and she would not allow herself to cry. It was not worth it for someone like Gu Changqing. She stared at him and said softly, I love you, and hating you won't change the outcome. Then love me, at least you will feel better, right? Gu Changqing gently stroked her face, and he couldn't help but love it. He had a woman by his side, and a beautiful fiancée. But Wen Man was different. She was a piece of meat that he had endured for 4 years and was reluctant to eat. Now he wanted to devour her whole, eat her up and clean her out. Gu Changqing leaned in close to Wen Man's face and said in a seductive tone, why don't we negotiate the terms now, and you stay here tonight? Wen Man's eyes turned red. She said in a very calm tone, I have to go home tonight. And Gu Changqing, if you want me to stay with you, you have to wait until my father and Auntie Ruan leave the city safely. Otherwise, there's no way we can talk. Gu Changqing took a step back and looked at her. He chuckled, when did you become so sharp-tongued? He was in a really good mood today, and he even agreed to an exception. Okay. I'll let Uncle Wan and Auntie Ruan leave the city. I'll return everything from the Wen family. Wen Man let out a sigh of relief. Gu Changqing suddenly hugged her slender waist, resting his chin on her thin shoulder, and said very gently, I'll buy you a villa in the suburbs, and I'll spend my free time with you, okay? Wen Man's expression was cold and indifferent, but her attitude was not as sharp as before. Gu Changqing deliberately tried to please her, saying to her ear, let's have another child. Wen Man, I want a little girl as cute as you. Wen Man was disgusted. Ai Wei was right, Gu Changqing was schizophrenic. Otherwise, how could he do all those bad things and still act so affectionate? Wen Man hated him, and her body stiffened in rejection. How could Gu Changqing not know? He snorted and didn't really care. He had her in his hands, and he would slowly train her. Wen Man was pure, like a blank piece of paper, and he wanted to write his name, Gu Changqing, all over it. Wen Man did not stay long. When she left, Gu Changqing personally saw her to the door of the villa. Wen Man had a set of villa keys in her hand. I will withdraw the charges tomorrow. Your father and Auntie Ruan will be fine. Gu Changqing smiled lightly. Wen Man, I don't want to wait too long. Don't let me down, okay? Under the light at the entrance of the villa, Wen Man's eyebrows and eyes were picturesque. She said softly, Gu Changqing, when have I ever let you down? After saying that, she looked up at him. In her eyes, which had once been gentle and affectionate, there was no longer the joy of the past, only resentment. Gu Changqing didn't want to look. He wanted to drive Wen Man back, but she refused. It's raining. Won't you let me be a gentleman for once? He teased her. Wen Man smiled faintly as she lowered her head. Gu Changqing, I said that we didn't need to be like this. After saying that, she pushed him away and walked into the night, where the rain was like silk. Gu Changqing was left empty-handed. He watched Wen Man's back, which was filled with rejection. He suddenly had a premonition that no matter what means he used to keep Wen Man by his side, her heart would never be with him. Gu Changqing did not feel lost for long. He firmly believed that Wen Man's love for him was just a man's desire to conquer, and he had never loved her. Never.